Hello Yoshi players, this is Yoshi Player here and welcome one and all finally to every episode of The Loud House Season 3 reviewed. It's been a very long time since I talked about Season 2, and I apologize for the very long wait, though part of that could be because by the time I did my Season 2 video, Season 3 was only just starting, and when I did my Season 1 video, it was around the time Season 2 began to finish. Plus, there was a lot of stuff I had to get done, so I apologize for the long wait between this and the Season 2 video, but I feel as though it's also given me enough time to reflect on all the things I had to watch throughout this season to justify my thoughts on what I think about each and every single episode. If you're not familiar with these videos or any episode review series, then here's how it goes. I go through all of the 48 episodes in this season and give them each a rating of either glory, average, or garbage house. At the end of it, I'll do a pie chart counting up all the episodes ever in each tier and then give the season a full rating. I'll give out a few notes along the way and then top it off with my top and bottom 5 episodes for the season. I'm simply stating these rules for anyone who has never seen these type of videos before, so if you haven't, well then that's how it goes. It's been a very long time, so I hope the wait's been justified. Without any further delays, it's time to finally get into Season 3 of The Loud House. Starting off with Episode 53, our first special of the season, Tripped. During a road trip to their vacation destination, everything that can go wrong for the family does. So it took them long enough, but we finally have a road trip story for the Loud House. Road trip stories for me can be hit and miss. Some can be great fun while telling a great story, and others can be bad mostly because they rely on bad jokes. When it comes to a road trip story, it's usually like putting an idea in a blender and then it either coming out with something good or something bad at the end of it. It's safe to say I'm not the biggest fan of road trip stories, but that doesn't mean there aren't any I enjoy. If I could name off my favorite road trip movie, it would easily be a Goofy movie. Sure, it's very silly and cartoony when it needs to be, and it is based off of a television show that was trying way too hard to be cool, but I enjoyed the movie mostly because of its characters, its storytelling, and how the jokes only usually came on when they needed to be there. It was a perfect balance of surreal storytelling and decent comedy. I bring all of this up because Tripped is an episode that unfortunately doesn't do any of this. Instead, Tripped feels more like a mess of bad decisions, bad comedy, and out of nowhere situations. Right from the beginning, I could tell that this episode was going to be a little rough around the edges, where the family starts counting up their money, and then as soon as they're done, they proceed to perform a Congo dance line because they're so excited about the vacation. And yeah, I get that they're excited, but this comes right the hell out of nowhere and pretty much sets up just how stupid everybody's going to act throughout this episode. But I'll get more to that later. Another thing this sets up right from the get-go is that throughout the entire episode, the comedy is just terrible. And most of it consists of running gags, whether it's Rita forgetting Lily because I guess the joke is she's a bad mother, or a joke repeated from Potty Mouth where someone tries to explain something but the rest of the group is so bored that they just ignore it. But by far the worst running gag in this episode belongs to Lori, where she farts in Vanzilla and of course she blames it on something else. Why the writers still think this is funny after season 1 makes no sense to me, but what makes it worse is how exaggerated it is throughout the entire episode. And aside from the few characters I mentioned in this episode, not many of them actually get much to do. Yeah, we get a few jokes from Leni, one in particular where she makes an egg salad sandwich, but the joke is that she made it 2 weeks prior to the vacation because, you know, she's an idiot. Other than that, every character pretty much gets nothing to do. The only characters who actually serve something to the story are Lisa and Lana, as they're the only ones that actually try to fix the situations that everybody gets into. Everyone else like Lincoln, Luna, Luann, Lynn, pretty much everybody else gets nothing to do aside from just going along with all the stupid things that happen throughout the episode. But the main issue I take with Tripped is that when it comes to its storytelling and its characters, it doesn't do a very good job with how it's executed. I once again go back to a Goofy movie because despite all of the stupid things that happened in that movie, it was more balanced and focused more on the characters and the dramas that they were going through. Plus, when something stupid did happen, it was either out of action from a side character or out of pure accident from the main characters. Tripp's idea of telling the story is by simply having the characters performing stupid deeds in order to advance it along. Whether it's everybody deciding to get on a prison bus because they can't tell the difference between a normal bus and a prison bus, or how Lynn Sr. leaves Vanzilla in reverse unlike anyone else. Every time there's an element of plot progression, it's all because of actions thanks to the characters, and that's not how you're supposed to tell a road trip story. If there's supposed to be something silly that happens, it needs to be out of pure pure accident or from a side character because we want to sympathize with the main characters so they can get to their location in time. But the fact that practically every character has to do something ridiculously stupid in this episode doesn't make me sympathize with them. It just seems like a lazy plot developing. And it doesn't stop there. Even for a cartoon about a road trip story, there's a lot of things in here that make absolutely no sense. Towards the end of the episode, the family find this old plane that's been sitting there for God knows how long, and Lana's able to fix it no problem. The issue isn't the fact that Lana's able to fix a plane. I mean, she is a mechanic, I understand how she could fix it. The issue is that earlier in the episode, a door falls off Vanzilla and she couldn't fix that, for seemingly no reason. And then Rita mentions that she's able to fly a plane, which I suppose works in this situation. I mean, we don't really know much about Rita's backstory, so I guess I'm open to it. And then all of a sudden, the episode expects me to believe that 13 people can fit in a 2-seat plane. This actually leads to a climax where the family have to get Vanzilla back from a repair service because they left it in reverse, so of course it's gonna go missing. And to make things even better, the driver thinks that the plane is a police plane, because of course we need more characters acting stupid just to have some stakes being raised. I don't know what's worse, the fact that he thought it was a police plane, or the fact that the fertilizer tank has a drawing of Laurie on it, because of course we need more jokes about Laurie farting. Oh, and did I mention that there's a musical number in this episode that serves absolutely nothing to the story and doesn't even feel like an actual legit song to me? All it is just a family badly singing all the events that happened throughout the episode, so if you were a fan of those running gags, then you're likely going to like this song. And despite it being a musical number, Luna, the only one that can actually sing well, gets no lyrics in the entire song. Yep, Luna pretty much gets nothing to do despite the fact there's a damn musical number in the episode. It all culminates into an episode that's trying way too hard to keep the audience's attention by just having random things happening. Aside from the fact that the family get on a prison bus because they can't tell the difference between a normal bus, they run into a prison guard, who at first I thought was going to be the antagonist of the episode, but he serves absolutely nothing to the story. He's just there for a few jokes, and then by the end of it, he's back in jail, so what was the point? Though that did actually lead to a kind of funny joke where Leni thought his handcuffs were bracelets. That was kind of funny. And to be honest, if I'm on the topic of positives, I thought the ending was really satisfying. Yeah, I know it was hard putting up with all the bad things that happened, but honestly, the way it concluded was nice. It was something I wasn't actually expecting. But I don't think that's enough to make up for a really messy episode. Tripped may have had a good idea, but its execution leaves a lot to be desired. It just felt like the writers were just throwing random things at the screen because they needed something to tell the story, so let's just have the characters acting stupid. I'm really going there, people, but we're starting this season off with a Garbage House episode. If you really want a good road trip story, I'd recommend watching something like a Goofy movie, or even another example like Planes, Trains and Automobiles. Don't settle with Tripped. It's a waste of time that probably won't keep your attention despite how much it's trying to. Episode 54A, White Hare. When Lincoln has a plan to introduce himself to a new girl, he gets knocked out and is shown a dream of a boy rabbit who lives with 25 sisters. So in case you guys aren't too familiar with trivia of the Loud House, it originally started off as a cartoon with rabbits. Yeah, it doesn't sound like the most amazing thing out there, but it originally was going to be about a boy rabbit named Warren who lives with 25 rabbit sisters. This was when the Loud House was in its early days of production, and I mean really early days. The idea of rabbits was dropped because Chris Savino, the creator of the show, felt it wouldn't be relatable if every character was a talking animal. So he decided to change the characters to humans and reduce the number from 25 to 10. I honestly think that was a really good move on Savino's part because this episode showcases a lot of issues I would have taken with the initial concept of Loud House if it was the show that it decided to be from the start. In fact, I feel as though the problem is evident as soon as the dream sequence starts. There's simply too many characters to focus on. 10 is a good number if you want to focus on a large family, but 25? No, it's really hard to keep up with who's this or who's that or what their personality is like. It's a major issue with this episode because if you're going to have so many characters to focus on, it's going to be hard to keep track of who's who. And yeah, I know this is just one episode, but think of how this problem would have been if it was the entire series. Aside from a few of the rabbits, I can't tell any of them apart. Some are clearly trying to be similar to the normal sisters in the normal universe, but then others are trying to be, well, I don't even know. I guess one of them's an artist, one of them is cranky, one of them's sleepy or something? I don't know. Although there is actually one thing I remember about the rabbits, the fact that one of them is named Beth and the other is named Bethany. That's literally the only thing I remember, because calling someone Bethany despite the fact that Beth is actually a nickname for said name is really odd. I know it may seem like it's always hard to follow a large group of characters that you're not introduced to, but I was able to get introduced to the Casagrandes just fine, to the point where I could pretty much remember all of their names and who's who. Because unlike the rabbits, the Casagrandes, as well as the Louds, are given distinct identities so that I know which one is which, and I can even remember their name. All the rabbits just look the same, and I don't find anything distinct about them at all. There's also the disturbing fact that there's a rabbit foot in this episode, and there's no Lily rabbit, at least I'm assuming. And that has been a theory that's been going around since the episode came out, the chance that the rabbits possibly murdered Lily just to have her rabbit foot. I don't really want to get into dark details here, but what I do want to get into is something that's actually just as bad as its concept, the scene where Warren is talking to the girl rabbit. I get the joke is supposed to be that Warren doesn't know exactly what he's saying to this girl, but you gotta have a certain limit so that it doesn't get aggravating, and when I watched this scene for the first time, it was so uncomfortable. Every time Warren said something out of his mouth that felt incredibly stupid, all I could think to myself was, does this kid seriously have any idea what he's even saying to this girl? Now, all the problems I combined could have easily made this a Garbage House episode, but thankfully there is one aspect that saves it a little bit, and that's the ending. After Lincoln sees that the girl rabbits can actually help their brother, he decides to get the same help from his sisters. Yeah, it does feel like yet another be yourself trope, but what I like about this ending is the fact that every sister points out something positive about Lincoln to prove their point, and that was really sweet. And what makes it even better is that this episode actually calls back to heavy metal when the sisters were meddling on Lincoln's problem with Ronnie Ann. So when I see an episode that actively acknowledges the issues with another episode and tries to fix it, I admire it a lot. Not to mention the scene when Lincoln's talking to the girl on the bus is really cute. The entire 2 minutes at the ending was enough to make this an Average House episode, because if it wasn't for that I would have easily given this one a Garbage House rating. Not a particularly low Garbage House if I was given the choice, but all this episode does is make me feel thankful that we only got the Loud House the way it is nowadays, because if this was what the show was originally going to be like, I wouldn't have wanted to watch it at all. In fact, this review series probably wouldn't have even been made in the first place. Episode 54B, Insta-Gran. Pop Pop introduces his new girlfriend to the family, and she seems great at first until she starts showing up unannounced. I absolutely adore the character of Myrtle. And that's great too, because when the episode was first leaked, I was a little worried that Myrtle was going to be a grumpy grandmother who takes advantage of her kids because she's lazy or something like that. It's something that's been done in a lot of cartoons, but thankfully it isn't done here. She's simply a nice grandmother who loves the people around her and wants to make them happy. It's especially great too because there's an actual reasoning for her to do this. She's never really had a family before, so it was impossible for her to know how to properly take care of grandchildren when she was given the chance. I really do sympathize with Myrtle because it doesn't showcase her in a way where she wants to make herself look better because she's awesome or something. It just simply actively acknowledges that she doesn't have a family and she really wants one. And when the siblings do feel bad for her and try to make things up with her and Pop Pop, it was really sweet to see. And speaking of Pop Pop, he still manages to be a great character in this episode, especially when he tries to attack the old guy because he thinks he's dating Myrtle. That was pretty funny. What isn't funny, unfortunately, is everything involving Linja. And before anyone asks, no, it's not because I don't like Lin, it's just because I don't find the concept of her being a ninja very funny. It just seems like that's the only joke, the fact that she's a ninja, I suppose. On the whole though, this was a really enjoyable episode, and it's all thanks to the character of Myrtle. If she turned out to be a very unlikable character, I could have easily given this episode a simple Average House rating, but because of that, combined with some pretty funny, amusing gag, definitely makes for a rewatchable episode with a good heart to it. Episode 55A, Roadie to Nowhere. Luna learns Chunk was like her in high school and worries her ambition to be a rock star is unrealistic. So after a year and a half, Luna finally gets a brand new episode for herself. Because need I remind everybody that she didn't get a single episode in season 2. Yeah, I know some people consider Ella's for Love a Luna episode, but that wasn't really about her. Sure, she was a major focus, but it was mostly a siblings episode, so I don't really count it as such. Luna episodes have always been very interesting for me for the arcs I often explore with Luna's character. Someone who doesn't really have much of an identity and wants to get out there as a famed rock star. It was an arc that was slowly starting with For Bros About to Rock and slowly began to segue itself throughout other Luna episodes. So much so that Roadie to Nowhere really dives into a deep topic about Luna's character flaws all the way through. And it once again continues to deliver on her personal journey. That's something she was showcasing a lot throughout For Bros About to Rock. It's not like most siblings episode where they deal with a problem and then go back to it right at the end of it. Throughout the course of Luna's episodes, it's her getting a taste of reality when it comes to doing what she loves most, and that what she's actually doing could lead to her doing something very uneventful in the future. Or so much so to the point where she doesn't have much of an identity and she won't be able to do anything significant in their life. It's a very heavy topic to talk about that ties together Luna's character flaws all the way from the very beginning. And I think in this case, the best place to start is with Luna herself. She does most of the heavy lifting in this episode, so much so that Lincoln doesn't even get a single line of dialogue, which is a first for the series. What I love most about Luna is that she's a character that can easily carry an episode on her own. She's such a fun and enjoyable character that gets so much personality throughout her dialogue and tons of natural charisma. It's kind of a shame that Luna isn't used much for comedy, and when she is used, it's usually done very well. And this episode easily shows off some of Luna's most exaggerated yet goofy moments. The episode perfectly showcases Luna's personality, which is something I really needed given how long she's been absent from an episode about herself. But what makes it so significant is that every action that Luna does plays a huge factor to her behavior, where she believes if she goes down the same path as Chunk, who never really did anything successful in his life, that she may worry she may not set much of an identity for herself. Someone who's stuck in the same town with no fame and nothing to her name. It's very important for the episode because it's meant to showcase that it was never about the music, but rather Luna dealing with her identity and what she truly wants in order to have a great life. This is what I mean when the show has subtly been unraveling her character throughout the course of the series. It started out in For Bros About to Rock, where Luna's reasoning as to why she helps her siblings have the best first concert experience is because her first time led her to who she truly is and what she wants to do. And that was followed up by House Music, where Luna questions whether or not she'll be good enough to impress her idol Mick Swagger, who made her the person who she was. Even L is for Love ties into Luna's identity problem, where she's worried about coming out as bisexual. It was never about her randomly assuming that her dream will lead to nowhere in life. It makes so much sense when you lay all the episodes together, and it all plays into Luna's character arc. So for me, when it comes to Luna questioning her capability to not be a famed rock star fits so well in this episode. And it gets to the point where Luna decides maybe the best thing for her to do is just to give up on music because it may not lead her to anything successful. Now yes, I know No Laughing Matter did something very similar where Luann gave up on comedy, but it's not quite as bad as it is here. In No Laughing Matter, the only reason Luann gave up on comedy was because she came off as a clueless idiot who couldn't take any criticism and decided to just give up because, oh, everybody hates my comedy, I'm not gonna try to improve, let's just give up. For a character that's always been self-aware about her comedy, it didn't develop Luann's character at all and didn't have her learn anything by the end of it. In this episode, Luna's reasoning for giving up on her dream is not because she can't handle criticism, but more because she realizes that being talented at making music won't always lead you to being a successful rock star, which in turn ties back to her character flaws involving her identity issues. In the first half of the episode, she tries a job that involves music, but it doesn't lead to anything, so she decides maybe if I try a job in a different category, I might actually do something well with it. And it actually leads to her being pretty well with computers, which is something I can relate to because I'm also pretty well with computers. But even after Luna decides to pursue this as her new goal in life, she finds out that Chunk never gave up on music and still performs with a band to this day. As it turns out, Chunk is very happy with where he is in life. He may not be very successful, but he's still doing what he loves. And that leads to what Luna decides to do at the end of the episode. She may not make it as a famous musician, but what matters most is that she's continuing doing with what she loves. And I take that off as an incredible way to tell the story and something that I could easily see many people relating to. Of course, this is a Glory House episode in every sense of the word. I really hope we get to see more episodes about Luna's goal because I feel this is only just the beginning. Episode 55B, A Fridge Too Far. Lincoln wages war after his food is fleeced from the refrigerator. So this is gonna feel a little awkward to me, but as a talking loud colleague, I actually never liked this episode. It's awkward personally because everybody loves this episode. Okay, it's not just that fact, but it's also the fact that all of my talking loud colleagues love this episode. So why didn't I like it as much as them? Well, before I get to my problems, I should probably address what I love the most about this episode. It's actually everything that doesn't involve the siblings. Lin Sr.'s subplot is handled very well in this episode, and how he wants to open up his own restaurant so he has to make something appetizing for a food critic. I got to sympathize with him enough, and I did want to see him achieve his goals, but the issue is that it doesn't actually take up a good chunk of the episode's runtime. And it also plays into the main plot of this episode, which is where my real issues begin to shine. I'll admit that I find the situation they're in very relatable, how someone keeps taking your snacks from the fridge, but that doesn't necessarily make it better for me. When I see the siblings acting so bloodthirsty over protecting their favorite foods, it didn't rub me in the right way, because the way the siblings handle this situation is not done with respect. As soon as Lincoln finds out that his snack was taken from the fridge, war immediately begins, where the siblings intentionally try to hurt the others just so they can keep their precious little snacks. Whether it's Lincoln breaking Luann's foot, Leni being knocked into a wall, or worst off, Lana being fucking electrocuted, that's the kind of thing that rubs me the wrong way, to the point where I felt absolutely no sympathy for any of the siblings. And it got so much worse when it got to the scene where they threw out Lin Sr.'s ingredients. I don't care if it's something you can't stand or if it's something you don't want to eat, just simply throwing it out is not okay. You know there's probably an orphanage out there that really needs food and you just want to throw it out because you think it's disgusting. And yes, I know the siblings end up helping Lin Sr. at the end of the episode, but I don't feel as though they did it because they felt bad about initiating war on each other, rather because, oh no, our dad needs our help, so we gotta help him. I'm sorry, but even after what happens at the end, I didn't feel any sympathy for the siblings and it didn't redeem them in any way. It doesn't help that the episode isn't funny enough to make this better. I mean, I suppose the gag with Cliff eating food from the bin was kinda funny, but that's really about it. On the whole, I'd consider this a garbage house episode. I apologize to anyone who likes this episode, especially my talking loud colleagues, but I don't see what you guys see. All I'm seeing out of this is a nasty episode with unlikable characters that just rubbed me the wrong way. But at least I agree that it had a good subplot. Episode 56A, Selfie Improvement. When Carol Pingree's photograph gets more likes on social media than Lori, she tries to one-up her. This episode honestly feels very shallow. More so how this episode feels like a reminder of how most teenage girls act nowadays, where they constantly want selfies and want to get more likes than the other, and trust me, I've met people that are like that. And that's the main conflict that Lori goes through throughout the entire episode, where she's so dead set on wanting to get more likes than Carol that she has to stop everything she's doing in her life just to take a fucking selfie, and I just didn't care about what she was going through. That's the main issue I take with this episode. I just didn't care, and it's not that I don't understand the situation that Lori's going through. Trust me, I'm someone who's been through that kind of thing before, where you have someone you don't like getting more likes or reputation than you do. The problem is that the episode delivers it in such a vapid and shallow way that I didn't care. Maybe it's a bizarre coincidence that most of the workers on this episode were actually females, you know, the writer, the director, the producer, they were all females. I don't know if it was a coincidence that that was the reason the episode turned out the way it is, but I'm also not gonna shame all girls for being that way. I've definitely met a few girls that aren't into selfies and like to do their own thing. Hell, many episodes of The Loud House have proven that. But when it comes to a point where an episode wants to deliver idea that's so petty and so shallow, it doesn't come off as relatable. You can't just go ahead and assume that all girls are like this. That ends up making it unrelatable for most people. It certainly doesn't relate well with me because this isn't something I care about. Maybe I would if the episode was genuine about itself or if Lori was a more likable character, but unfortunately none of those things are apparent here. The only joke they seem to repeat throughout most of it is that Lori Laurie's trying to take a selfie and something bad gets in the way, so she has to do it again. I would be fine with it if the episode played the idea of selfies and stuff as a parody, but it takes itself so seriously and is so straight. I mean, when we got that sequence of Laurie saying, "I'm gonna get more likes than Carol," and then the background gets all Dragon Ball Z-like, I found that just completely dumb. And yes, as I said, I didn't care about Laurie's situation. So what if she's only got a few less followers than Carol? Who cares? I will also kind of admit I liked the scene with Laurie and Bobby in this episode. I may not be a fan of their shipping, but how this episode handled it was actually done better than I was thinking. It's one of the few instances where Laurie actually cares about Bobby, which I suppose was nice to see. And the ending was really predictable. By the time Laurie meets Carol, we get the whole, "Oh, you're jealous of me? I was actually jealous of you" shtick. And just when I thought that could have actually been a somewhat nice way of ending the episode, nope. Right after it tells its message, Laurie suddenly realizes that there are these two other girls that are trying to get more likes than her and Carol, and she goes back to square one. I don't care if that was supposed to be a joke, it completely flies against the message of the episode, and I don't appreciate that. Honestly, all this episode gets is the average house rank. I would have been more appreciative of its premise, and I would have been more sympathetic of Laurie if I actually cared, but the problem is I don't. This episode did not need to be so shallow and petty with its storytelling, because if it wasn't, I might have actually given a crap. Episode 56B, No Place Like Homeschool. When the siblings discover that Lola gets homeschooled, they attempt to get in on the action to avoid going to school. Much like other Lola episodes that have come out in recent times, Lola is once again the best character in the episode. I like how she's come to the point where even though she still has her bratty pageant attitude, it's not to the point where it's frustrating anymore, unlike the earlier episodes of season 1. I like seeing her reluctantly agreeing to help the siblings despite the fact that she really wants to get some sleep. That was a little amusing. And I legitimately did feel sorry for Lola when it turned out she couldn't go to homeschool because she didn't get enough sleep and so she couldn't pass on her tests. But even though I enjoy Lola's character here, everyone else is pretty much the same. They all want to go to homeschool, they all realize they gotta do some work, they all want to get help from Lola, and they all try to make up for it at the end. Now that I think about it, it reminds me a lot of Yes Man. In fact, is this episode written by the same writer? I didn't actually remember, but is that the case? Either way, everything that comes out of this episode wasn't very interesting and didn't keep my attention for much longer. Surprisingly, not even Mr. Grouse was enjoyable in this episode. The constant running gag of him playing ice cream music and the siblings keep thinking that it is an actual ice cream truck didn't last funny for very long. There's no new twists or surprises with this episode. It feels like a very been there, done that kind of plot. Plus, there is a similar episode I'd much rather watch than this. All in all, this episode gets the average house rank. Episode 57A, City Slickers. While visiting the Casa Grandes, Lincoln spends time with Ronnie Ann while Laurie tries to become a city girl. It honestly feels like a sigh of relief to see the Casa Grandes again. Even if at this point it's only their second episode in the series, they're always entertaining whenever they're on screen. I also really liked the little subtle detail they gave to Ronnie Ann's design where she now has bags on her eyes, kind of like Lincoln, because she lives with a big family. That was a nice little detail that it didn't need to do, but was nice to see regardless. Everything else in the episode was okay, though the subplot with Laurie didn't really feel like a subplot and felt more like a joke because everything that happens in it is essentially just jokes and that's it. Laurie imagining being a city girl and all these great things happening when in reality it's actually a lot of bad things happening. She cries about it, but then Bobby gives her a pet talk and she's like, "I'm still gonna be a city girl." Not only does this subplot feel like a joke, but it doesn't actually feel like Laurie developed anything. She just wants to be a city girl because I suppose she has her boyfriend? I mean, I know I could be making assumptions here, but if the episode doesn't give a clear mind on what Laurie's actually learning, then what am I supposed to know? And the main plot with Lincoln and Ronnie Ann could have been more interesting if it wasn't so rushed. And the promos kind of gave away what was going to happen, but even if that wasn't the case, it's also very predictable. It feels like this episode is trying to cram way too much in the span of 11 minutes, which is why I think this could have been a much better episode if it was longer, like say 22 minutes. We could have gotten more time on Lincoln and Ronnie Ann's friendship developing, and we could have especially gotten more time on Laurie trying to be a city girl and adjusting to her life in the city, especially if she's going to be going there for college. I mean, just because it doesn't feel like a quote-unquote special kind of episode doesn't mean it always has to be 11 minutes. I think if it was 22 minutes, it could have been a much more interesting episode. That said, what we actually got isn't bad, it just feels very rushed and too crammed in for my liking. I was almost going to give this episode the Glory House, but then I remember that this could have had so much potential to be better, so I'm gonna stick with a very high average house rank. Episode 57B, Fool Me Twice. The Loud family hire stunt doubles in order to avoid Luann's April Fool's pranking. This episode is likely going to be the last in the April Fool's trilogy, because considering the episode that season 4 just had, I think it's safe to say that this is definitely the last episode of the April Fool's trilogy. And I mean more the trilogy that focused on Luann's pranking. My opinion on the April Fool's episodes isn't black and white. I really didn't like April Fool's rules for how unlikable Luann was and the poor things that Lincoln goes through, but I also really enjoyed Fool's Paradise for how crazy and funny it was. I may not like it as much as I used to, but I still consider it one of the best episodes of season 2. So next to an episode I didn't like and an episode I did like, how did Fool Me Twice step into the mix? Oh my god, this episode was pure garbage house material. I hate to say it, but I feel pretty much no hesitation in saying that this is the worst April Fool's episode by far. Firstly, much like April Fool's rules, Luann is incredibly unlikable, simply because of the actions that she does. I get that April Fool's is essentially like Christmas to her where she can have fun with the things that she does, but I think she goes way too far with the actions. But what makes that element much worse is that in this episode, what Luann actually does, I do not for a second consider it as pranking. Essentially what I mean is, the second that Luann discovers that her family are stunt doubles, she gets them to humiliate themselves in public. Essentially what that means is, she's getting the stunt doubles to embarrass themselves, essentially ruining her family's lives. At least in April Fool's rules, I could justify Luann's actions as pranking. Yeah, some of them were very harmful, but at least they were just pranks, nothing more. But in this episode, Luann's ruining her family's lives, and she doesn't care. Or because she just wants to have her fun on April Fool's Day. But it just makes Luann come across as so soulless and uncaring towards her family. Not to mention it goes against the character that she was in Making the Case, where she was angry at Lincoln for filming her in public and ruining her life, but she has no hesitation in doing that to her own family. So yeah, not only does that make Luann a hypocrite, but it also makes her even more unlikable than she already is. And my god, the comedy is so unfunny. The only joke I kinda liked was that small reference to Lock and Loud where Lisa mentions the cameras that she installed in the house. That's the only joke that got a laugh out of me, because everything else either made me hit my face or just groan. The running gag of the family falling over after seeing their stunt doubles doing something embarrassing isn't funny because it literally goes on for like 3 minutes and there's no variety beyond it. And I honestly didn't laugh at the fact that Lincoln's stunt double is an old man. I get the joke, it's because Lincoln has white hair, but that was such an obvious joke. But let's talk more about the ending, which a lot of people say is the best part about the episode. I disagree. I mean, it's better than the rest of the episode, but that doesn't make it good. The family decide to get back at Luann by pretending that they're moving away from Royal Woods, which is a good way to get back at someone who essentially just ruined your life, but I still don't think the execution was handled very well. I've seen lots of people saying that they felt bad about Luann because when she finds out that her family's moving away, she begins to cry and desperately pleads to them to not move away. And for the record, I did not feel any sympathy for Luann during the ending. Yes, she does break down and cry and desperately pleads with her family to not move away, but do you seriously expect me to feel any sympathy for her after the actions that she did? Seeing someone cry and feeling sad after essentially ruining my life does not make me feel sympathy for them at all. Plus, I never got the impression that Luann actually felt bad for her family and was simply just sad because she didn't want to move away from the home that she loved. Sure, she does apologize, but that seems more like pleading than a genuine apology to me. And yeah, the family may have been pranking Luann, but that doesn't fix their problem, does it? I do think the ending is better than April Fool's Rules ending, but that still doesn't take Fool Me Twice out of being the worst episode in the trilogy. I get why a lot of people may enjoy this episode, but personally for me, it was way too unpleasant. Episode 58A, Net Gains. Lynn desperately wants to win the basketball championship, but gets drafted onto a terrible team. When the concept for this episode first came out, I could see exactly where it was going. There's been a lot of sports movies and sports cartoons out there, there that's all about the superstar joining a bad team and she doesn't want to be a part of it. But you know what? Predictability is never a bad thing as long as what's actually executed on screen is done well. And I will say this, everything else that isn't involving the story is actually not that bad. And on that topic, Flip is easily the best character in the episode. I love what they did with him here, and the gags they bring with him are just so joyful. Like how he slightly moves the Royal Woods sign so he doesn't get arrested, or how at the end of the episode when Lynn's team finishes the basketball game, he gives them all a Flippy to share and it's just one for 5 members. That was really funny. This episode does hit a lot of the similar cliches that other sports movies have done, but it's not as bad here because unlike other certain stories, I actually didn't mind Lynn's teammate. Yeah, they may not have had that much character, but they were a little amusing, and some of the things they did do were pretty cute. I also take note of Paula's voice actress being Cree Summer, who's one of my favorite voice actresses in cartoons. Hell, I wasn't even annoyed by Lynn in this episode. Sure, she was a little annoying towards the beginning, but after that, she's pretty much tolerable. Which, believe me, after many episodes where Lynn comes across as such an unlikable character, it's so refreshing to see it here. At least unlike in other episodes, Lynn actually goes through development. She realizes that she's being an asshole, apologizes for it, and ends up having a fun time with her team at the end despite the fact that she loses. It's cliched for sure, but it's natural development that I found really appreciated. I'm gonna give this episode a very high average house rank. If it wasn't for the obvious cliches in there, this episode could have been great, but as it is, it's fine. It's definitely worth a few rewatches, and I definitely consider this the best Lynn episode by far. Episode 58B, Pipe Dreams. Lynn Sr. and Rita decide to build their own bathroom after they become sick of waiting in the long bathroom line. So this episode finally addresses the age-old question of why the parents don't have their own bathroom. I mean, a lot of modern parents today do, so it was a little odd that they didn't have one of their own, and it was really funny to see the fact that they finally decided to do it after all of these years. It's especially surprising because before this episode came out, I thought it was going to be a Lana episode, but nope, it's about Lynn Sr. and Rita, but once this plot was revealed, it made a whole lot more sense. Unfortunately, even though this episode answers the age-old question of why they never had their own bathroom, it's also against the idea of them having their own bathroom. Why? Because throughout the entire episode, it tries to frame Lynn Sr. and Rita as being evil and sneaky for wanting to have their own bathroom that the siblings don't know about. You know, the same parents who pretty much provide a house for the family to live in and enough food and money to keep the siblings satisfied. Those same parents that now want to build their own bathroom? How selfish of them! That's just dumb. Why don't the parents deserve their own bathroom? Considering the situation they were in at the beginning, it makes so much sense for them to do so. I mean, I suppose it's a little unnecessary for them to not tell their siblings, but Jesus Christ, it's not the end of the world. They're just trying to build their own bathroom. What's the big deal? And the episode is dead set on wanting to make sure that these two deserve the punishment that they get, to the point that when the siblings find out that they had a secret bathroom, the parents both start crying and admit that they never told them in the first place. But the parents don't deserve to be punished for this. All they're trying to do is make their own bathroom. And considering the siblings made this problem from the start, it makes so much sense for them to have their own bathroom. But the episode constantly has to show the parents pulling off evil faces and laughing maniacally, but there's a better way of making characters realize that they're doing something wrong without actually intending to do so in the first place. What this episode should have done was start off with the similar problem and then just have the parents using the bathroom as normal, but then they slowly realize that some of the siblings are struggling or in pain because they're waiting outside the bathroom for so long. The parents realize they're being a little selfish and they're like, okay, you can use our bathroom. There you go, the episode's fixed. That would have made for a much more interesting story. But I can't take this story seriously because I never felt like the parents were in the wrong for what they did. And trying to exaggerate that to make them seem evil in that regard does not make things any better. And it doesn't help either that the episode is so predictable. As soon as the pets accidentally step into the bathroom, the parents think that the siblings have secretly found it, they get more and more paranoid, so it leads to the point where they get locked out of their own bathroom because they were too stuck up their own asses and had to get bit at the end to realize what they did was wrong. In terms of the jokes, there was only one part I found funny, and it actually involves Lynn. At one point, Lynn Sr. is trying to get pipes inside the house and he doesn't want her to notice, so he sticks them in his pants, and the reaction she has on her face was priceless. ridiculous. At this point, it's probably the funniest thing that Lin has ever done, and it's kind of sad that it's only when she's pulling a reaction and not actually saying anything. But otherwise, everything else is either played into the story or way too lowbrow. I have to be honest, during that scene when Lana showed the bucket to her parents, it was just disgusting that I almost wanted to throw up. It's not funny because we can actually see the bucket and it's just disgusting. It would have been a lot funnier if it was out of the viewer's sight, but nope, it's there. We gotta show them the details so the parents feel like they want to throw up, except it made me want to throw up too. I was also really annoyed by the fact that when the siblings found out the parents were hiding their bathroom, they just say, "It's okay, you can use our bathroom," because for some reason that bathroom belongs specifically to them. And need I remind you that that's the reason why the parents wanted to build their own bathroom in the first place. I think the quality of this episode can easily be summed up by what's shown in Lana's bucket. That means garbage house. There was no need to make the parents look so evil for the actions that they did when them building their own bathroom was actually more justified at the end of the day. If I ever called out my parents on building their own bathroom, they'd probably laugh at my face, and that's totally justified. Episode 59A, Fandom Pains. Lucy becomes annoyed when Laurie and Leni start watching her vampire show because of a cute new character. When the concept behind this episode came out, I was so excited. The idea of a show poking fun at fandoms, as well as its own, had so much potential for comedy. When I saw the promo for this episode, it got me even more excited because I was really interested to see where they were going to be taking this story. So it really pains me to say that at the end of the day, Fandom Pains did not live up to my expectations. For an episode that's all about poking fun at fandoms, it doesn't actually do much with it. There's really only two situations of them really doing anything like that. The first is how some viewers can admire a minor character that's coming onto the show despite them not really having much prevalence, or how some certain fandoms post a petition to get a character banned or an episode banned. And I know this is true because back in 2017, the Loud fandom made a petition to ban No Such Luck. And when it comes to the former, it never goes to the point where Laurie and Leni want this character to have his own spin-off show or desperately want to see him in more episodes. No, they just watch the show because he's a hot actor and that's pretty much it. I know fandoms tend to have this thing where they're excited to see a recurring character come back, but that's not what happens in this case. It's just a hot actor that they really enjoy, and I don't really see the joke there. So despite the episode failing to poke fun at fandoms, I was at least more interested to see if they were going to do anything special with the story, and they don't. It reminds me a lot of Pipe Dreams where they try to frame a certain character for doing something wrong, even though, from my perspective, they didn't really do anything to deserve that punishment. In this episode's case, Lucy constantly keeps trying to get Laurie and Leni to stop watching her show, so her final plan is to petition the writers to kill off the hot actor. The problem is that Lucy never goes above and beyond just wanting to get her dream or acting like an asshole throughout the episode. She simply wants the hot actor gone because Laurie and Leni are annoying her on watching the show. The only way this could work is if Laurie and Leni were simply being introduced to the show thanks to the hot actor, but were slowly starting to enjoy other aspects about it. But no, the only reason they watch the show is just because of the hot actor, and it's getting in the way of Lucy trying to enjoy her favorite show. So it honestly feels justified for Lucy to kill off the hot actor because these two airheads are constantly annoying her. And yes, I said two airheads because Laurie and Leni are practically the exact same character in this story. And my god, if I ever hear them say vom ever again, I'm gonna want to rip my ears out. So it leads to a predictable story where Lucy gets her wish, but Laurie and Leni are really upset and now Lucy feels bad about it. Like I said earlier, there's no reason for Lucy to deserve the punishment that she gets. All she was trying to do was enjoy her show, and these two airheads were constantly trying to get in on it just because, oh look, there's a hot actor, we have to watch the show now. But what makes it even worse is the bullshit excuse the episode expects me to believe in order to try and sympathize more with Laurie and Leni. When Lucy tries to apologize to the two, they end up saying, yeah, Trent may have been the reason why we started watching the show, but the reason we stayed was because we want to spend time with you. So the episode is essentially telling the audience that if you feel bad for someone, you should watch a television show with them out of spite. And that's not what it is when it comes to watching a television show. You should watch it because you enjoy it and you want to get to know the characters, the environments, the situations they go through, not just because you feel bad for someone or you want to spend time with them. If the episode simply implied that Laurie and Leni started getting into more goth things and it was getting in the way of Lucy's show, that would make a lot more sense. But simply put, they just stayed because they wanted to spend time with Lucy. And no, I don't buy the excuse that they enjoy the show, because it's blatantly stated throughout the episode that Laurie and Leni pretty much know nothing about the show. They're constantly asking, who's this character? Why are they in this environment? Why is he here? And all that kind of stuff. Maybe if the episode went in the direction where Laurie and Leni started getting more into goth things that was getting in the way of Lucy's shows, that could have actually worked a lot better, but what they actually went with does not feel right to me. So despite the episode's best attempts to try and poke fun at fandoms, it's ultimately a garbage house episode. That's a damn shame too, because I had so much hope for this one, and there was a lot of potential to tell some great jokes and even tell a really cute story. But at the end of the day, it's lost in itself that it doesn't actually know the full potential of making fun of fandoms and shoving a message that makes people think they should just watch a show out of spite. Oh, and this episode also has a joke that I'm pretty sure will offend every goth out there. It states that when people signed the petition from Lucy's group, they thought they were trick-or-treaters, which is not all that there is to goths, guys. If you wanted to make a joke about Hot Topic, you could have done that, but no, you had to make something incredibly shallow instead. Episode 59B, Rita Her Rights. After racking up tickets, Rita finds it more relaxing to perform community service than being at home. If you're familiar at all with Sound of Silence, then the concept behind this episode should sound very familiar. A character is sick of being in a loud environment, and they simply want some peace and quiet. That didn't rub me the right way, because I was never a big fan of Sound of Silence. In fact, I consider it one of the worst episodes of all time, but I was at least hopeful that this episode would deliver something better at least. And in the long run, yeah, Rita Her Rights is a better episode, and I mean a much better episode, but I still wouldn't say it's that great. But I definitely don't hate it as much as most people do, because the reception behind this episode is extremely negative. I feel like this is one of those episodes that's trying way too hard to be funny, and I know it sounds really stupid to say something like that considering this is a comedy show, but when it comes to comedy trying to be forced, I don't find it that funny. It's all about timing and perfection. It should all come naturally, but this episode delivers its comedy at a fast pace that it's impossible to find anything funny. I mean, just look at something like Shrek. The comedy is much more dialogue based with character interactions. You can't just throw random things at the screen at a fast pace and expect that to be funny. That's not how comedy works. And what the episode actually tries to deliver isn't very funny. Whether it's Lana accidentally, in air quotes, vomiting on Rita, which was just disgusting, Lynn being a lunatic because of course she is, Rita racking her tickets wasn't very funny, and apparently destroying a clock is a crime in this town. The only joke I found somewhat amusing was when Lola mentioned that after her judge teacher judges her at the pageant, she goes into a locker and screams. It's kinda sad, but also kinda funny at the same time. Even if this is Rita's first episode, I just don't find her very interesting as a character to carry out an entire episode. Unlike Lynn Sr., who's managed to prove that he can do more than just being the typical dad by working at a restaurant and over-exaggerating himself, Rita's just the standard mother, and that's really about it. Other than that, there's not much to take with this episode because it's very basic, standard, and not very interesting. And I don't think Rita's enough to carry the episode either. So I think this one's an average house episode. A pretty light one to be fair, but also not one that I'd want to rewatch again. Episode 60A, Teachers Union. To try and make gym class better, Lincoln and Clyde set Coach Bukowski and Mrs. Johnson up. I think what I like the most about this episode is just how ridiculous everything is. At several points it's trying to take itself seriously, while the next minute it's trying to be an over-the-top exaggerated cartoon. But I think the reason it works here is because, well, this is a very obvious and cliched story that's been done a lot, and yet they're trying to add all of these ridiculous things in the long run to try and make it more interesting. I may have often criticized episodes for trying too hard to be funny, but I think this one takes the cake. Every time I laughed during this episode, it was usually out of complete irony. How Coach Bukowski expects all of his students to do some very death-defying stunts, or how he's trying to murder, and I mean literally murder, Lincoln and Clyde towards the end of the episode, and all I kept thinking to myself was, someone needs to call the police on this guy. Every time something stupid happened within this plot that's trying to take itself seriously, just got a lot of laughs out of me. I think the episode itself knows full well that this is a ridiculous and cliched story and just wants to have so much fun with it in the long run. And ironically, I think that's what makes this a really funny episode. Although it's kinda sad too, because when the episode actually tries to be funny, it doesn't really work. Most of the laughs I got was out of pure irony and not because of any good jokes. Though that being said, I actually kind of enjoyed Girl Jordan's presence in this episode. Yeah, she didn't have a lot to do, but her facial reactions and her dialogue got a few chuckles out of me. And I mean that in an unironic way. The story itself doesn't tell anything interesting, and even after it ends, it just goes back to square one, so nothing's really learned out of it. But by far the worst jokes in this episode belong to Lori, where she has this running gag of continuously thinking that Lincoln has a girlfriend. I don't feel Lori was the right character for this gag. Maybe if it was Leni or something it could have been better, but I don't see a reason for Lori to be there. I know it's because she has a boyfriend, but is there anything wrong with just using Leni as the one who thinks Lincoln has a girlfriend? Maybe it could have been cute to see, or maybe it's just the poor sap of me that wants to see a cute moment between Lincoln and Leni in this show. So what's my rating for this episode? Well, I was almost going to give it the Glory House because of how ironically funny it is, but at the same time I was also going to give it an average house because in terms of its story, characters, and comedy, it's not really that great. So you know what, I think I'm gonna give it a very high average house rank. And I think that's really all I can say about this episode. I acknowledge it for trying to be ironically silly in this cliched story, but when it actually tries to be funny in certain areas, it doesn't help either. Not to mention, this is yet another Clinker McCloud episode that doesn't lead to anything substantial in the long run. Episode 60B, Head Poet's Anxiety. Luann teaches Lucy how to manage the ups and downs of pursuing a life in the art. It's funny that for a show having 11 main characters, the pairings it often gets are usually the same we've seen in other episodes. The usual ones we get are either Lori and Leni, Lincoln and Clyde, or sometimes Lynn and Lucy, so that's why it's really refreshing to see an episode that not only has a pairing we don't often see in the show, but thanks to an older episode, had some potential to tell a really interesting and engaging story. But while Lucy has still managed to maintain a great character and have plenty of good episodes in the long run, Luann has been kind of on and off for me personally. I mean, originally she used to be one of my favorite characters on the show, but then No Laughing Matter came out and pretty much ruined a lot of aspects of her for me. What hurt the episode the most for me was that Luann was turned into a clueless moron who can't take criticism, and her only possible solution for someone saying negative things about her material was to just give up entirely because critics are so mean. When the better solution could have just been realizing what's wrong with your material and trying something new to improve on your comedy. And no, Luann toning down her comedy didn't count as development for me because she still remains the same character she's been since day one. I bring all this up because Head Poet's Anxiety pretty much tries to treat No Laughing Matter as an episode that doesn't even exist. But before I get to that, I think it's important to establish what exactly is going on in this episode, because even before it came out, I didn't really have an idea on where it was going, because I don't recall Lucy ever trying to persuade something in terms of art, but then I remembered that poetry is considered art, so I guess that made things a little better for me. And not only does this episode go against everything No Laughing Matter had going for it, but it also manages to be a very fresh, engaging episode that has a lot of great stuff to offer. I really enjoy Luann and Lucy as a duo together. They may be two complete polar opposites, but they work off each other so well. Luann is very happy and looks at the positive things in life, while Lucy is more dark and broody and usually focuses on the negative things in life. It all plays into the story where Luann decides to help Lucy with her passion for poetry as she got another rejection letter and isn't too happy about it. Though you could also tell that Lucy is pretty much used to rejection and she can't do anything about it. That's when Luann tells Lucy her flashback, and this is when the episode starts to make me hate No Laughing Matter even more, because we get a series of backstory flashbacks showing Luann's part to comedy she had when she was a little girl. She was often criticized and beaten down for her bad jokes, but she simply learned to ignore the hate and just focusing on improving her craft, which led to her to graduate from Clown Academy and open her own business for birthday parties. Yes, the episode even makes a reference to funny business. And in that essence, Luann helps Lucy improve on what she loves to do through a series of steps, where Lucy not only gets better at her poetry skills, but also learns to bounce back from the hate that will come from putting your material to an audience, proving that everything you put out won't always be received well, but what matters most is moving past all of that. And it also helps that the episode is really funny, whether it's Lola's harsh words towards Lucy's poem that leads to a pretty solid comeback from her, or how Lucy's poem about death is being read to a bus of elderly people. Then we come to the second half where things start to get a lot more interesting. Since Luann's advice did so well in helping Lucy in the long run, her latest poem gets selected for the Royal Woods Theatre, the same place that Luann has been working towards as her goal to perform there someday, except Lucy beat her to it. This is the part of the episode where I started to feel a little worried that the second half was going to go down the route where Luann suddenly doesn't care about Lucy and potentially tries to sabotage her poem at the Royal Woods Theatre, and then it leads to some kind of emotional connection and reconciliation and stuff like that. But no, Lucy ends up discovering Luann's past and what she's been wanting to do, and she she feels so bad about it that she doesn't want to perform at the theater. And that's what I love about this episode. It never tries to make one side the antagonist or the other the protagonist. It tries to make both characters equally flawed with what's going on. It shows that both Luann and Lucy as being very human, with no one coming out as the antagonist all throughout the episode. But it also doesn't do any framing to make one character look more sympathetic over the other. And even when Luann finds out what Lucy's been trying to do, she realizes how much of an idiot she's been, apologizes, and just tells Lucy to do her poem because that's what she's been wanting to accomplish. It's a very sweet moment because Luann's finally putting her feelings aside and just persuades Lucy to go through with the performance. She should let her dreams get in the way of others, especially when it comes to her sisters. And while the ending was a little bit cliche that the poem just oh so happened to be about Luann, it was still a really sweet ending and was a great way to end off the episode. Everybody says this is one of the best episodes of season 3 and I couldn't agree more. It is definitely a great episode. And considering all the obvious pairings we get throughout the show, this one felt like such a huge breath of fresh air. Episode 61A, The Mad Scientist. Lisa gets invited to work at an institute and get away from her crazy family. Alright, let's address the elephant in the room. The episode's premise is very similar to that of GarageBand from season 2. I'm not going to go into much detail on what I didn't like about GarageBand, but one of the things that hurt the episode for me was that I couldn't take Laurie's situation seriously. Not just because of the fact that she's practically nearly an adult and is almost ready to move to college, but she's also 5 feet away from the house. And it constantly tries to make a big deal out of her being scared living alone by herself and that she can't take care of herself properly. I don't know if that was supposed to be a joke or not, but it doesn't help the episode at all and just made me feel kind of unsympathetic towards the situation that Laurie was going through. I bring all of this up because the mad scientist situation is much more believable in this essence, as not only is Lisa moving much further away from her family, but she's only 4 years old. Yeah, she may be a scientist, but that doesn't mean she doesn't have the instincts of a 4-year-old toddler. And while this episode did a fairly decent job at making me feel sympathetic for the situation that Lisa was going through, it's not entirely the case because the episode still has moments where Lisa's just acting like a complete dick. Most notably when she's telling her father to stop crying after she's moved away. I get that this is instinct for Lisa to behave this way, but if you wanted me to feel completely sorry for her, you shouldn't have moments where she's just acting like a complete asshole. But like I said, it's not like I felt no sympathy towards Lisa, because I do understand the situation that she's going through, as her family is constantly trying to look to her for solutions just because she's the smartest in the family. And when we do get the scenes where Lisa genuinely misses her family, it's really sweet and I did feel something for her. It's just I didn't feel entirely sympathetic if they wanted to make her a dick in certain scenes. The point is, while I do get why they established Lisa to be unlikable, it doesn't work completely. And what also doesn't work is that the comedy isn't that great. Although I will be honest, there was one little joke I liked in the episode where Lisa can't make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich the way Lincoln usually makes it for her. That was a little amusing. But everything else in the episode was meh. There's a scene where Lisa has pie charts, including her love for West Coast rap, except there's not really much of a joke there beyond just making a callback to Potty Mouth. We also get 2 instances of Lynn farting in the episode, which will never be funny to me because there's never a joke beyond just her farting. And there's also a flashback sequence where Lisa's being taught how to put on Ontsy pajama outfit from Leni, because, you know, Leni's stupid. Now I did say that the second half does do a good job at making me feel sorry for Lisa, and I stand by that. But what we get after these sequences though is something that ends up really damaging the episode. After Lisa admits that she misses her family and wants to go home, she says she can't because it would end up risking her reputation in the science community, even though that's pretty understandable because, you know, she's only 4 years old. But no, the episode needed some sort of conflict, so Lisa decides to use time travel in order to solve her problem. Let me repeat that. Lisa uses time travel to solve her problem in a show that is mostly slice of life. I mean, seriously? When I think of Loud House, I don't think of science fiction with monsters and superpowers. It's a series that's supposed to be grounded in reality and down to earth. And even though we've had a few moments in the series, like the trash monster from Shaw and Peace, or the few robots that appear here and there, the Loud House has mostly kept things realistic, focusing on characters who deal with real-life situations that we all face. That's part of the charm of the show, so adding the idea of time travel is making me worried about the fact that the Loud House is just on the edge of jumping the shark and it's now gonna try too hard to be weird just to stay relevant. I hope to God we don't get more sequences episodes like this throughout the series because this was just stupid. And that's ultimately what ended up hurting this episode for me, aside from the few other things I mentioned. So I think it's pretty clear this is an Average House episode through and through. I would have liked the episode a lot more if Lisa was actually much more sympathetic and wasn't being such a dick in the first half of the episode, and if it didn't have time travel to resolve its problem. I know it's not like the time travel completely comes out of nowhere, as Lisa does mention the possibility of time travel throughout the episode. The problem is that, well, they use time travel. I wouldn't mind if it was some sort of belief, but the fact that that's what resolves the episodes just seems lazy to me. I get if some people think it's really charming and clever, but personally, I thought it was just dumb. Episode 61B, Missed Connection. Laurie and Bobby worry that dating long distance is causing them to lose their connection. I gotta be honest and admit that I was actually curious about seeing this episode. Not just because the Casagrandes were coming back, but because it also could have had the potential to finally develop on Laurie and Bobby's relationship. It's no surprise that I'm not a fan of their relationship, and I've never liked it in the past. I would explain my reasons why, but my good friend Cynic the Critic made a great video showcasing all of the issues that I actually have with the couple, so I'll put a link to that in the description below. And you know what, for as much as I don't like Laurie and Bobby as a couple, that didn't mean they couldn't have a good episode. I mean, despite me not really liking Clyde that much, he still had plenty of good episodes here and there, like Argue for Real, No Way Down, and Baby Steps. On paper, this episode has a brilliant concept, where it attempts to add more complications to Laurie and Bobby's long-distance relationship and exploring the problems that it's usually had with a long-distance relationship. The problem is that Misconnection not only tries to take it seriously, but also tries to play it like a comedy at the same time. And yeah, I get it, it's Loud House, it's supposed to be a comedy, but you can't play it in both fields when you're supposed to try and make me feel sympathetic towards these two. There are plenty of scenes where we're supposed to laugh at Laurie and Bobby trying to spice things up, and we're also supposed to feel sorry for them because they miss each other and doubt whether or not their relationship will work. It is a pretty tricky tightrope to walk on, but what's most important is how much you're invested into the relationship between Laurie and Bobby. The problem is that in the past, the writers have never done anything to make me feel invested in these two, and now all of a sudden I'm supposed to take them seriously as a couple? From the start of the episode, there's a lot of potential story elements here. During the phone conversations, Laurie and Bobby each deal with something going on in their surroundings, and it made me wonder maybe their relationship really is starting to fall apart because of their own priorities at home. That's not the case, because it turns out they were just simple misunderstandings and they let something silly get to their head. As a result, there's no stakes or drama that's actually going on between these two, just a collection of misunderstandings that add up to nothing. And that's a problem if the episode is expecting me to feel sorry for these two and understand their pain that comes from a long distance relationship. It's not because of potential drama or cheating or family issues or anything like that, just simple misunderstandings that are taken way too seriously. I mean, the episode does hint that they might be losing interest in each other, but again, it's all a misunderstanding, which takes away any sort of sympathy I have for these two. I'll give the episode credit that I do believe that Laurie and Bobby are in love, but the writers also try to erase all of the problems that these two have had in the past and just tries to make them look like a perfect couple, which makes them less interesting as characters. Now I'm expected to believe that they're hopeless romantics who love each other forever, and that the only issue in their relationship is just distance. And there are really only two scenes in this episode that are taken seriously and expect me to feel sorry for these two, while the rest of the episode shows them dealing with mishaps as they attempt to be more romantic and fail. I don't get it. Am I supposed to feel bad for these two that they're losing interest in their relationship, or am I supposed to laugh at their failed attempts to keep the spark going? I think part of me wants this episode to be 22 minutes so it can have more time to explore the moral and provide us with more interesting conversations with Laurie and Bobby. Even when the ending comes around, there's another potential great story idea, but it's just kind of wasted. At least the episode itself does have a solid message about how littlest things in a romantic relationship, like conversations, actually mean a lot more than just great romantic gestures. But you know what, the episode is trying to flesh out their relationship as much as it can, and I do appreciate that for at least what it's trying to do. At least the side characters do get to carry the episode. We get to see the Casagrandes again, there's a funny little joke with Lola and Lana, and even though Flip isn't in the episode for very long, when he is on screen, he's pretty funny as well. At the end of the day, I feel Average House is the perfect rating to give this episode. It really does frustrate me because there was so much potential to flesh out Laurie and Bobby's relationship, but it doesn't work because all its interesting ideas just end up going nowhere. Combined with the wasted story ideas and the inconsistent tone, the episode is only simply okay. Episode 62A, Deal Me Out. Lincoln and Clyde worry that they're too old to still be fans of Ace Savvy. I really like the flashbacks in this episode. We actually actually get some insight onto how Lincoln and Clyde met when they were really little, and that their reasoning for meeting is because they're both fans of Ace Savvy. It's brief, it's simple, but it gives me an idea on how these two met, and it's honestly really sweet. At least it serves as a crucial part to the episode and tries to give it some flair, because everything else the episode offers is just kind of been there, done that. There's not really anything wrong with this episode, it's that it's kind of obvious from the start what's going to happen. It doesn't help that most of it is pretty repetitive and I didn't really get a lot of laughs out of it. I get the situation they're going through and I definitely see it as relatable, but it's just not that interesting in the long run. I mean, I suppose it's a little bit more interesting than other Clink and McCloud episodes, but it once again proves that Lincoln and Clyde aren't really that great as a pairing, because they're mostly the same character in that regard. They feel the same emotion, they go through the same troubles, and this episode is perfectly evident on that. Aside from the flashback, I thought the ending was kind of cute, how Lincoln and Clyde run into a group of Ace Savvy fans that are actually much older than them. That was a little cute, I suppose, but it's also nothing really spectacular. This episode is mostly average for me. While it does showcase most of the issues I often have with most Clink and McCloud episodes, at least it wasn't anything offensive. And hey, the flashbacks were cute enough, so that does make a plus. Episode 62B, Friendzy. Lincoln discovers he can get special privileges if he invites a friend over, so he takes advantage of that. Anyone remember Brawl in the Family? Yeah, I try not to. To this day, I still consider it the worst episode of the entire series, and was an episode that was largely criticized when it first came out. I mean, it doesn't get as much hate as No Such Luck, even though I personally think Brawl in the Family is a far worse episode, but that episode was still widely hated since its release. So much so that every time an episode was announced with the possibility of the siblings fighting, everyone just went crazy. And this episode is no exception. As soon as the plot was revealed, a lot of people were worried it was going to go down the route of, oh, Lincoln's trying to do something and the sisters get in the way and it's going to lead to everyone fighting, yada yada yada. So despite the initial worries, was this episode a surprising hit by the end of the day? If you mean surprising as in awful, then yes, this episode was surprising. I don't mean to jump to conclusions very early, but this was an awful episode with an actual interesting way of delivering its story. I'm not joking. As far as I'm aware, this is the first episode where it decides to deliver its story entirely, well, for the most part, in a flashback, where Lincoln's telling the audience the events of what occurred throughout the day. It's a little story element part that I didn't expect to see, but was actually really pleasant to see. It was an interesting way of delivering its story. It's just a shame that the actual story as told is really frustrating to get through. The first major issue with this episode is that every character, and I really do mean every character, is extremely unlikable. I'll give Brawl in the Family credit that at least I was able to give Lincoln some sort of sympathy, but that's not the case with this episode. Every character comes off as a whiny, insufferable brat who constantly wants to get their own privileges and try to one-up each other in every way they possibly can. And look, it's not like you can never make an over-the-top and exaggerated episode good. I enjoy episodes like Undie Pressure, Potty Mouth, and Sweet and Sour, so how come I don't enjoy Friendzy? Well, the main factor of making an over-the-top episode is that you have to have the comedy be consistent and funny, which is not the case with Friendzy. The comedy throughout the entire episode is just plain awful. The main joke this episode has going for it is that whenever a character gets their own privileges, they give off this evil grin or smirk towards the other characters, and this happens throughout the entire episode. The problem is that if you want to do an exaggerated episode, you shouldn't make it to the point where every character is unlikable, because that doesn't make it entertaining to watch. Take Sweet and Sour for example. Yeah, the siblings end up making things worse for the parents, but that was out of pure accident or something that was out of their hand. Plus, they were never intending to hurt each other or make things worse, they were just trying to have a fun time at the hotel. But Friendzy doesn't have that aspect, because each sibling comes off as a whiny little brat who feels entitled to get whatever they want, and if they have to deal with each other over something they want, then surprise surprise, they end up fighting each other. And the parents don't make anything better because they're gone for pretty much half of the episode. And I could argue maybe it was intentional for the sake of the message, but when Friendzy does deliver its message, it immediately tosses it out the window. The siblings learn that maybe they should talk to each other or come up with a plan to make things fair, and that's a solid message, but then the parents come out and say, oh, well, we kind of invited our friends over, so now we have privileges over you guys. Not only is it hypocritical of the parents to condone the same behavior this episode is trying to detest, but it completely flies against the message that this episode is trying to say. I know it was supposed to be a joke, but it's not a funny joke, and it feels like a lazy way to end the episode with a joke that just wasn't needed. But the other big problem with the siblings being unlikable in this episode is that all of their character traits, along with most of their personality, are just stripped away in order to tell its story. One of the reasons that makes Loud House so diverse from other cartoons is the various different characters who think and act differently from each other, which lead to a lot of interesting stories and character choices later in the series. But instead, this episode makes every single sibling think and act exactly the same way, where they only think for themselves and are completely selfish to the point where they don't feel like the same characters, but rather 11 rip-offs of Angelica from Rugrats. Not even the friends that show up in this episode manage to save it. Yeah, it's nice to see a few minor characters like Sam and Darcy return, but they're only there for the sake of the plot and nothing else. I don't really know what else I can say about this episode. It's garbage house through and through. The only positive thing I can say about this episode is that there was a little plant joke on TV that was a little amusing, but the entire episode just gives me a headache. At least unlike Brawl in the Family, the episode did have a good moral, but it's just a shame how badly that moral was tossed out of the window for the sake of a lazy joke. Episode 63A, Pasture Bedtime. The boys struggle whether to go to Liam's barnyard sleepover or Girl Jordan's awesome pool party. This episode has a very similar problem to Pipe Dreams, in which it tries to overly punish a character for actions that they do in the segment. And in this episode's case, it's when Lincoln's friends decide to sneak away from Liam's barn while he's asleep just to go to Girl Jordan's pool party. While I find Lincoln's friends' punishment to be more earned than how it was in Pipe Dreams, I still don't think they needed to be overly punished for the actions that they did. Don't get me wrong, the action of leaving your best friend just to go to a pool party does come off as pretty selfish, but that's the problem. Lincoln and his friends do it while Liam's asleep. It's not like they say, "Oh, fuck you, let's get out of here," and then just leave. They do it while he's sleeping, so that means their punishment isn't overly justified as much as it should be. Again, I'm not saying Lincoln's friends didn't deserve to be punished for what they did, but there was no need to make it this overly intensified. In terms of the comedy, it isn't the greatest. The stuff that happens at the pool party isn't very funny, the actions that happen at Liam's barn isn't very funny, as well as there being jokes that just come out of nowhere, like a scene where chickens just randomly attack Lincoln and his friends, which I don't get. I don't think that's something chickens particularly do, so what's the joke? Though I did like the joke at the end of the episode where Liam implies that he cut up one of his pigs because he wrestled with them, and it turns out he didn't. That was a little amusing, but other than that, there's not much I can really say about its humor. And if you're going into this episode expecting to see more of Girl Jordan, well, prepare to be disappointed because she's barely in this episode. You'd think that because this takes place at a pool party she'd have a little bit more to do, but nope, that's not the case. I mean, it would have been nice to see her ditch the pool party to join Lincoln and his friends because she found it more entertaining, but that's not what happens. It would have been something nice to see at least. Ultimately, it's just an average house episode, not much else I can really say about it. Episode 63B, Shop Girl. The siblings worry that Leni is too weak to handle herself, so they teach her how to be more aggressive. I've been waiting so long to finally see a Leni episode that actually gives her character some true needed development. What I'm trying to say here is that even if I enjoy other segments like Driving Miss Hazy and No Spoilers, they didn't really develop Leni in any way. She mostly came across as an obstacle in those episodes. Like, oh, we gotta teach Leni how to drive, but we gotta make sure she understands the kind of things we're trying to say to her. Or, oh no, we're trying to set this party up, but Leni could accidentally spoil it, so we gotta make sure she stays away from it. The only episode where it really feels like Leni got any sort of development was Along Came a Sister, but even then it didn't last very long because even if she did save Lincoln's from his reputation, she didn't really change her perspective on spiders. No, this is the first episode that actively develops Leni's character in a way I was so grateful to see, because after the initial setup I was worried that even if Leni was going to be aggressive, she was going to become very abusive and take advantage of her siblings, but that's not what happens here. Even if Leni becomes more aggressive, she finds more satisfaction in simply just helping other people rather than getting what she wants first. It's development that really stays true to Leni's character and fits her perfectly. She's not just some simple-minded idiot who doesn't understand real struggles in life, she also has a passion for fashion, and that's greatly showcased in this segment. It's handled so well to the point where Leni actually gets a job at the end of the episode. And spoiler alert, this isn't something that only shows up in one episode and doesn't show up in the next. No, she has this job throughout the rest of the season. That's fantastic progression for Leni, and it's sorely needed after all the episodes where they've treated her as either an idiot or someone who's just an obstacle. This is exactly the kind of Leni I always wanted to see, and to see it finally showcased perfectly in this segment is wonderful. What's also wonderful is that the episode is mostly really funny. My favorite joke by far was at the very end where Lola Lola tries to give some guy her fries because she thinks if she does so, she'll get rewarded in the end, and even after the guy says no, she gets more and more frustrated with him to scare him off. That was easily the funniest joke in the whole episode, and proves just how far Lola has come when it comes to her comedy. She's gone from the typical whiny brat to being a very cynical and funny person. Of course, it's a Glory House episode. I really hope they continue in this direction for Leni, because there's so much more potential you can tell with her character, especially given that she now has a job. Episode 64A, Gown and Out. When Lola advances to a regional pageant, she worries she could lose for the first time. This episode's execution feels very similar to Roadie to Nowhere, where both characters learn that maybe if they pursue with their life and something they're passionate about, it might not lead to anything successful. But whereas in Roadie to Nowhere, where it was more about Luna worrying if she was ever going to make something out of her life, in this episode it's more about Lola worrying about the fact that she could actually lose for the first time at something that she really enjoys doing, which is regional pageants. She's literally more paranoid about actually losing than attending this next step up for her. So much so to the point where she even pretends to be sick just so she doesn't lose at the pageant. I really appreciate what they're doing with Lola right now. Even if she still comes across as the same bratty pageant attender, they're showing off more of her vulnerable side. And that all comes down to the message of the episode, where even if you lose at something you really enjoy, you should keep on doing it because, well, you really enjoy doing it, and that's all that matters. But for as much as I really like Lola in this episode, I was also impressed by the way Lori was handled. Yeah, she does a complete 180 halfway through the episode where she goes from really uncaring to very sympathetic, but she does play a crucial part to the development that Lola goes through. I like how supportive Lori is of Lola in this episode, and even after Lola admits that she was fake being sick, Lori isn't angry and she actually wonders why she does it, and so she tells Lola a backstory about something that happened to her one time, where despite the amount of times Lori lost to Carol in the past, she got over her insecurity, where even after all the times that Lori got beaten by Carol, she got over her insecurities and just learned to enjoy the events that she was attending. I'd say the only character I wasn't very entertained by was Lincoln, where they decide to continue his running thing of trying to help Lola during pageants, which is something that was brought back from Toads and Tiaras. But in that episode it made more sense because Lincoln had a goal in that episode. He wanted Lana to do the pageant just so he could have the chance of winning tickets to Dairyland. But in this episode, I'm guessing he does it because he loves her, or the joke is that he's secretly into pageants or something like that. I don't really get it, but I wasn't really impressed by Lincoln's presence in the story. While this isn't Lola's best episode, or in that matter, Lori's best episode, but it's still a very enjoyable episode with a very solid message, solid story, and solid comedy. Episode 64B, Breaking Dad. Dad has Mr. Grouse watch Lily while he goes to a concert, but things quickly start to go wrong. And no, when I mean start to go wrong, not in the sense of two boys and a baby. The problem in this episode is actually much more believable, but before I get to that, I want to quickly ask everyone something. Does anyone remember the SpongeBob episode Dumped? In that episode, SpongeBob introduces Gary to Patrick and he starts becoming very attached to him that SpongeBob becomes very lonely. In this episode case, Lily suddenly starts calling Mr. Grouse Daddy after he watches him for the day, which makes Lynn Sr. worry that Lily is potentially forgetting about her own father. The problem I have with Dumped was that it felt overly dramatic, and that made the overall episode just feel really unnecessarily depressing. But in this episode, it never tries to be too depressing. It still provides a lot of comedy here and there, and that just made the viewing experience a lot more charming. And the reason as to why Lily calls Mr. Grouse Daddy makes so much more sense. In Dumped, the only reason Gary stayed with Patrick was because he had a cookie in his pocket, and that's it. And that wasn't really much of an emotional conclusion to the episode. But in Breaking Dad, the reason why Lily calls Mr. Grouse Daddy was because he was wearing Lynn Sr.'s sweater throughout the entire episode, and that made Lily think of her father. That is a genuine twist that I did not see coming when I first saw the episode, but how it was handled was terrific. And what's great about it is that it isn't making such a big deal out of it. It's not straightforward, it's not so over the top, it's subtle about it, and that's what makes it so brilliantly written. And speaking of Lily, her moments in this episode very well may just be some of the cutest moments in the entire series. Every time I see her bonding with Mr. Grouse or Lynn Sr., it's just adorable. And Mr. Grouse is once again a fantastic character, where of course the only reason he's watching Lily is just so he can get some lasagna from Lynn Sr. I swear to God, if they're trying to turn Mr. Grouse into the Garfield of Nickelodeon, I will greatly appreciate that. There's even a few smaller things I found really funny, like how every sibling that isn't Lily appears in the form of a fight cloud, and that still qualifies as an appearance. That's brilliant. I don't know what else to say. This episode is just brilliant. I loved every aspect about it, and nothing about it felt shoehorned in or stupid. It all flowed naturally to a twist that I didn't see coming, and I really appreciate it for that. Episode 65A, Ruthless People. When the Loud House gets infected with termites, one half stays with Pop Pop while the other half stays with Aunt Ruth. This episode was such a waste of a funny story idea. The potential there was for comedy involving both Pop Pop and Aunt Ruth was just golden. Sure, I may have criticized Aunt Ruth in the past in episodes like Two Boys and a Baby, but the idea of half of the Louds staying at her location and seeing all of the wacky things that unfold there could have been really funny to see. But unfortunately, it's another one of those episodes that doesn't want to have fun with itself and tries to get across a moral so desperately. Let's address the elephant in the room right now. I don't think Lin Sr.'s side should have been overly punished for the actions that they did. For those who haven't seen the episode, Lin Sr.'s side, which consists of him, Lori, Luna, Lincoln, Lin, and Lola, want to swap side with Rita so they can go to Pop Pop's instead. And when you do a story like that where that side feels like it's unfair for them to go to a place that they don't like, that could have actually made their punishment more justified. The problem is how it's executed. Lin Sr.'s side never go to the extreme when it comes to convincing Rita's side to swap. All they do is make them offers to swap, and that's it. They don't threaten them with anything, they don't dare to hurt them or ruin something they love in some way. They just make offers because, hey, I was wondering if we could swap sides, and if you do so, I'll give you something nice afterwards. I'm sorry, but how is that something that automatically justifies punishment to Lin Sr.'s side? Sure, the episode does try to make them seem sinister and evil for the actions that they do, like how they were wishing that the other side got a miserable time, but I feel like they just came in out of nowhere and didn't fit within the context of the story. That being said though, I don't think it was as badly done as, say, Pipe Dreams or even Pasture Bedtime. This episode at least tries to justify that Lin Sr.'s side were being really selfish about where they wanted to go, but that doesn't automatically make it a good thing. What makes that element worse is that even for an episode that's way too heavy-handed in its moral, the characters that we focus on never learn anything by the end of it, and that all comes down to how the story is done. Which leads into another one of my biggest issues with the episode: the story beats make absolutely no sense. By the time Lin Sr.'s side get to Pop Pop's, they discover that Aunt Ruth actually has a lake house, and that's where she took Rita's side. But not once in the show have we ever heard of Aunt Ruth owning a lake house. It felt like it was only thrown in because we need to make the punishments for Lin Sr.'s side seem more justified. But it just comes across as a lazy way to punish the characters, with no context behind it all. And it gets much worse by the second half of the episode. After Lin Sr.'s side is so sick of Pop Pop's, they want to swap sides with Rita's again, once again, making offers to go to Aunt Ruth's lake house instead. But unfortunately, they can't actually stay at her lake house because, as it turns out, there's termites there as well, so they have to stay back at her house, and what did they discover? Pop Pop's place has suddenly rented a cruise ship for Rita's side to stay on, and that's when the episode just stops. Yeah, no morals learned, no characters going through struggles or development, it just ends at the point when they discover what Pop Pop's side has rented, and I'm sorry, but the way the story was executed in this episode made absolutely no sense. It honestly makes this episode feel like a first draft, like the writers were just throwing a bunch of random things at the screen because they wanted to tell a funny story, but also offering a message that felt way too heavy-handed. And because of that, I felt it was too lost in its narrative. The plot seems rushed, and nothing is justified, and the side that we're focusing on throughout the whole episode does not get a happy ending. I get if you want to punish the characters for actions that they do, but you still gotta at least give them something to learn or a happy ending by the end of it, especially if they're the characters that we focus on. And that sucks because, like I said, Lin Sr.'s side is overly punished for the actions that they did. And again, while I don't think that element was as badly done as Pipe Dreams, I still don't think it was done well. In that aspect, it kind of has a similar problem to No Such Luck, where we're supposed to feel scorn for the characters for the actions that they do, but because of the punishments that they get, it ends up making the audience feel overly sympathetic for them when the episode is clearly trying to make it seem like the opposite. Have Lin Sr.'s side do even worse actions to justify their overly punished nature, and maybe the episode could have been a lot better, but no, it doesn't want to have fun with itself, and I can't have fun with it either. And yes, I also hated how Lana was handled. You'd think that for an episode about punishing characters for actions, Lana would have been punished for the actions that she did, but nope, she gets away with it scot-free. As soon as the family discover that there's termites, she's like, no, don't kill them, we have to save them, they're so cute. Which makes no sense within context of Lana's character because she doesn't care about bugs. She eats bugs. She has no sympathy for them at all, so how come now she suddenly cares about them? I mean, I could argue that they were different bugs, but still, it makes no sense. Termites ruin families' homes, and she doesn't want them to die. She's more caring towards termites than her own family, which just seems really shallow. And yet, for some reason, she decides to bring them with her to Aunt Ruth's lake house and keeps them there, for no reason, other than we needed to have Lynn Sr.'s side seem more punished for what they did. Honestly, if I was Lana's father, I would have sent her to military school for a week. I'm exaggerating on that last part, obviously, but I think you're starting to understand the issue I take with Lana's character. And none of the characters ever get to do anything exciting, though I will take issue with Lynn for the actions that she does as well. As a result of the termites eating the house, she breaks through a wall while she's also flexing to herself and acting like she's stronger than she was before, which took practically no effort to piss me off. Combined with the two scenes where she threatens Lincoln with violence and has a really bad fart joke, Lynn was also really annoying in this episode. Not as bad as Lana's, to be fair, but still something I was really annoyed by. But outside of the few characters I mentioned, nobody else really gets anything to do. Everyone's just there to go along with the story, and that's it. Though I suppose the few scenes with Leni were kind of okay, but that's really about it. The whole episode was dumb. Do I think this is the worst episode of season 3? No, not by a long shot. Oh, it's certainly a garbage house episode, but I personally think there are episodes that are much worse than this one. It's not frustratingly dumb like Pipe Dreams, it's not frustrating in general like Friendzy, it's not even really mean-spirited like Fool Me Twice. It's just a really bad episode with terrible execution of its story. It's definitely dumb, but not enough to be one of the worst episodes of the season, I feel. Episode 65B, What Would Lincoln Do? I wonder if Christina Pichelli wrote that title. Lincoln is assigned with a woodworking assignment, but has a history of failure on the topic. I may have criticized other Lincoln episodes for having him being mistreated poorly despite him not really doing anything wrong, but even though he does have a history of failure on the topic, he still does a lot of actions in this episode to warrant his punishment. He comes off as very lazy and whiny throughout the whole episode. The former in when Lincoln and Rita are trying to build a stepping stool and he doesn't want to do it, and the latter in when he tries to buy a stepping stool just so he can get a perfect grade in the topic. Lincoln does a lot of bad decisions in this episode, but it never comes across to the point where he's unlikable. He does want to succeed on the topic, but just doesn't approach it the best way. And even though he does get his punishment, it's not too severe and he does still get a happy ending. It's remarkable for an episode to have a character that doesn't come across as unlikable, but still does bad decisions to warrant a somewhat decent punishment, and never to the point where it's too extreme, which is kind of funny considering this is the sister episode to Ruthless People. I really enjoy the scenes with Lincoln and Rita trying to build the stepping stool, as it's not too often we see these two interacting with each other. And it helps that the episode is decently funny. I wasn't even bothered by Walt in this episode. Yeah, what he did towards the end was a little uncalled for, but I mean, come on. Lincoln pretty much stole his birdhouse from him. If I was Walt, I'd be pretty pissed off about that too. What I don't think it needed was Clyde. If you're really gonna tell an episode about woodworking, you could have had a better side character for the story, like maybe Lana or something. But no, not only does Clyde's presence add absolutely nothing to the story, but his running gag is so not funny. Despite that though, I thought this was a decent episode with a decent execution and decent way of delivering its characters, for the most part. Episode 66A, Scales of Justice. Lana springs into action when she learns her favorite fish are in jeopardy of losing their home to construction. So this plot idea is very similar to that of Frog Wild from season 2, where Lana's trying to save an animal from something. Except this episode is trying to go for a more environmental message. It's totally understandable why Lana would want to save the fish's home from construction. She genuinely enjoys the place and doesn't want her fish friends' lives to be ruined, especially since they're having baby. Unlike Ruthless People, I was able to sympathize with Lana a lot throughout the episode, and her desperate attempts to try to save the fish's home were not only really funny, but also really sweet as well. I prefer that aspect over Frog Wild. While even though I did really enjoy the episode, I felt like it was trying too hard to be sweet. On top of that, it's actually really funny. I love the running gag where the news reporter keeps acting like she's being interviewed and states her name over and over again. But I especially love the reference to Peanuts, where whenever a character's talking, it slowly turns into a trumpet. You know, the kind that goes wop, 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 wop. I especially loved how it was used the second time, where it turns out the trumpet was being played by Luna. That's just something that fits her so well. However, the worst gags in this episode without a doubt belong to Leni. I get that Leni's someone who doesn't think properly when she's panicking, but how this episode did it was so painful to sit through. It made her scenes in this episode almost as bad as that one moment from Kick the Bucket List. I'm dead serious. And it happens like 3 times in the episode, where she sees something that panics her, she screams, she runs off, and she runs into either a wall or a tree. I'm getting really sick of the writers trying to make Leni seem stupider than she really is, because that's not all to her character. It's especially dumb because she's looking right in front of her, but her eyes are closed. Why would anyone have their eyes shut while they're running away from something that's terrifying them? Despite that though, I still thought this was a worthy Glory House episode. It's hard to determine whether or not I prefer this or Frog Wild, but it's still a really enjoyable episode at the end of the day. Although maybe Frog Wild gets bonus points for not having a stupid running gag in it. Episode 66B, Crimes of Fashion. When Leni gets fired from her job due to missing scarves, Lincoln and Clyde take on the case as Ace and Jack. Even though it's not that well done, the best part of the episode without a doubt is how the mystery is handled. I mean, sure, as soon as you see the actual culprit appear, it's pretty obvious that it's them, but unlike, say, Sleuth or Consequences, the mystery actually does add some weight to it and doesn't feel like Lincoln and Clyde are just dancing around the issue because they need to fill in the runtime. I got the impression that Lincoln and Clyde were trying their hardest to solve the mystery, whereas in Sleuth or Consequences it was just them dancing around the issue. I like how one of the hints is that scarves aren't just worn as scarves but also capes, which helps Lincoln and Clyde determine who the real culprit is. And the action that unfolds during the mystery is pretty fun stuff. I especially like the part when they assume it's Scoots and try to stop her. And even though it's not a major factor, I still enjoyed the way Leni was handled. She doesn't get a lot to do, to be fair, but she does provide Lincoln and Clyde with that hint that I mentioned earlier. So even if the mystery is about trying to prove Leni innocent, she does at least contribute to the mystery and how to solve it. But like I said earlier, even if the mystery is a lot better than in Sleuth of Consequences, it's still not the greatest mystery I've seen. Like I said, as soon as you see the character, you pretty much know that's the culprit. But at the very least, it still managed to be an enjoyable episode regardless. It may not be the most original episode or even the most exciting episode, but for what it was definitely a fun ride. Episode 67A, Absent Minded. Clyde wins a perfect attendance award but realizes he missed a day and mustn't confess so he won't lose his junior administrator job. Believe it or not, that's the only premise I wrote for myself because the actual one that's provided is really confusing to understand. Anyway, my favorite part about this episode was the twist at the end, where it turns out the only reason Clyde missed out on a day was because the whole school was closed. It's a genuinely good twist that I didn't see coming, and combined with all the hints that they provided throughout the course of the segment, it really played into how well the twist was handled, which is more than what I can say for the rest of the episode because, oh boy, this episode was so boring. I'd go as far as to say this is one of the most boring episodes in the entire series, and feels like the most perfectly average episode that I can think of. Nothing in this episode comes off as interesting, nothing comes off as funny, nothing comes off as frustrating, nothing's offensive, it's all perfectly average. The execution is so middle of the road material that I didn't feel any emotion towards it. I may have just had praise for the twist, but how the episode gets across his story is also so obvious. The entire episode is so repetitive. Nothing new is added. It's just Clyde feeling paranoid that someone's gonna discover his secret, so he tries to cover for himself. And Lincoln's just there for no reason. He adds absolutely nothing to the story other than the fact that we needed another Clinker McCloud episode. I appreciate the writers for attempting to add more character to Clyde, but that's also kind of my issue with the episode. He's written off as a Mary Sue, a perfect kid who doesn't try to do anything wrong. Episode Episodes like Baby Steps added much more to Clyde because they tried to make him seem like more of a flawed character, someone who doesn't think he has the responsibility to take care of a younger sibling. But here, now it feels like they just threw out all of Clyde's character traits just so he could become a perfect kid, and I just don't see that as a very interesting character. There's just a lot of stuff I failed to pay attention to because, believe it or not, on my first viewing of this episode, I fell asleep. I'm not joking, on my first viewing of this episode, back when it first came out, I actually fell asleep. Now maybe part of that could be because it was early in the day, or where I was positioned, or something like that, I'm not sure. But if an episode is so boring to the fact that I fell asleep during my first viewing, you know you've done something wrong. Well, I should reiterate, there's nothing really wrong with this episode, well, except for maybe what they did with Clyde, or the fact that they tried to bring back Clyde's crush on Laurie, but it was just so boring that I failed to care about it. I appreciate what they did with Clyde's character, but I don't think it was handled well, and that's not the kind of character I find very interesting. It's one of the most perfectly average episodes I've ever seen, and I don't have any reason to care about it. Yeah, the ending wasn't a cop-out, thankfully, but the rest of it was too boring for me to care about. Episode 67B, Be Stella My Heart. When the new girl starts hanging around Lincoln and his friends, they begin to suspect she likes one of them. So this is the sequel to White Hare, following up from the scene when Lincoln talks to the new girl on the bus. This episode is essentially a proper introduction to the new character, where her name is Stella and we finally get to see what she looks like, because in White Hare we never actually got to see her face, or even know what her name was. Although I have to say, did Stella have some sort of growth spurt before this episode came out? Because in White Hare, she was practically the same height as Lincoln, and now she's a few meters taller than him. I get they wanted to give her a redesign, and personally I do think she looks a lot better than she did in White Hare, but still, it's just a little odd how she's suddenly much taller than the boys. Aside from that though, how was the actual episode itself? Well, it's really weird. This episode has a lot of good intentions, but the execution brings the whole thing down. However, I'll start this off by saying that I really love the character of Stella. I love her design, I love her voice, I love all the things she does. She's a really adorable character that I would love to see more development out of. I like how she's essentially a no-nonsense character, where even after all the actions that the boys do, she decides she doesn't want to be their friends because of how much of idiots they were being. And I like how it's very clear from the start that Stella doesn't want a boyfriend and that she just wants to be friends with someone because she's new to Royal Woods. I really hope we get to see more episodes about Stella because she has so much potential as a character. I'd love to know more about her backstory, where she came from. There's so much potential there. And she plays a crucial part to the moral, which I really like. Well, actually, this episode technically has two morals. One is about not letting girls get in the way of bromance, which is one I'll talk about a little later on, and the other about how just because a girl's hanging out with you doesn't automatically mean they want to be your girlfriend. That's the moral I really like, and somewhat feels like a metaphor to how people are constantly shipping characters in cartoons. I like the idea of the ending about how Stella simply becomes a friend of the group, but I don't think the rest of the story was handled to much respect. I hate the execution of the story. All that happens is that Lincoln and his friends are trying to fight for Stella, then they start to fight each other, and then they realize that they should let girls get in the way of their bromance because it's so strong. But you're already trying to tell a story about how girls shouldn't automatically be your girlfriend just because they like hanging out with you. There was no need to tell this story, and it doesn't help the episode at all. You could literally just have the episode about Lincoln thinking about if Stella likes him or not, and nothing would change. In fact, it would probably make the episode a lot better. Simply just have Lincoln's friends as side characters trying to help Lincoln's confidence in wanting to be Stella's boyfriend, and the moral of that story would remain exactly the same. There was no need to tell this story about boys fighting each other just for a girl. I've already established that Lincoln's friends practically have no personality, and they are so not funny here. They're essentially just one-joke characters. Liam's the one with the accent, Zach's the nerdy one, Rusty's the ladies' man, and Clyde's just the guy that goes along with Lincoln's plans. And that's all there is to them. I don't really need to be seeing one-joke characters just fighting each other over a girl when there was so much potential to tell a good story here. And it doesn't help either that the comedy throughout the episode is atrocious. I get that that was the point, to show how bad the boys are acting, but that doesn't automatically finally make it funny. That's something of my life I don't want to remember. The fact that I was humiliating myself at the age of 11 when I was trying to talk to girls. Why would I want to remember that? How is that something I find relatable? And even for an episode that's a sequel to White Hare, it completely contradicts its message. In the end of White Hare, Lincoln learned to be himself, and now in this episode, he's trying to be cool, even though he already learned to be himself. That's why I felt if you just had the story about Lincoln learning to be more confident in talking to Stella so that they could potentially be a couple, that would have been so much more interesting. But no, you had to tell a story about the boys fighting each other, trying to act cool, and it was just too painful for me to sit through. While I definitely appreciate what this episode was going for and the intentions it had, the story and execution of it all leaves a lot to be desired. There was so much potential for this episode, and I can clearly see what the writers were going for, but it's the execution that brings the whole thing down to garbage house levels. I really enjoy Stella's character, and I think the moral was done very well, but there was a much better way of delivering it. Maybe someday I'll make a rewrite to this episode just to kind of prove my point, but we'll see. Episode 68A, Sitting Bull. The older sisters reluctantly let Lin into their babysitting club, but she quickly proves to be too aggressive. This may come off as surprising to some people, but I was actually really interested in seeing where this episode was going to go. Sure, the idea of Lin babysitting someone, considering her persona, was a little disturbing, but still there could have been potential to flesh out her character and give her some proper development that she sorely needed. I mean, so far the only episode where I feel like she developed at all was a net gain. And at first, I was initially on the thought that this episode was about babysitting the younger sibling, something that I think the older sisters are very capable of, and it would have been really cute to see them interacting with the younger siblings and bonding with them in their own unique ways. But no, as soon as promos came out, it turns out they're actually babysitting other families, which didn't really make a lot of sense to me because that felt like something that came out of nowhere, but if I know Loud House, I know that they usually like to throw in things out of nowhere just for the sake of the story. But despite that, I was still at least interested to see where it was going to go, but I wish I kept my mouth shut because this episode, oh boy, this was a bad one. Now before I get into the actual episode, I figure it's important to establish my reasonings for why I've never liked Lin as a character. To me, I've always seen Lin as a one-note character that's devoid of having any interesting personalities. Yes, I can see the appeal she has for some people, as she is the most tomboyish girl of the family and she is into sports, but that's literally all she has going for her. I may not like Laurie as a character, but at least most of the time she's aware when she's being a jerk. Lin, meanwhile, seems to have no self-awareness of the actions that she does to everyone and only thinks that she's just trying to have fun. The worst case scenario is whenever she treats Lincoln more like an object for her sports and less like an actual brother. And whenever an episode is usually about Lin, she's always written off as the character that I've always hated her to be, and unfortunately, this episode is no exception. In fact, it seems to greatly acknowledge the bad things that Lin does and goes all the way with it. I think this is an episode that's easier to talk about if I go through it bit by bit instead of just talking about random things at different points. So none of the sisters are available to look after one family, so they decide to get Lincoln to do it, and immediately Lin butts in saying, "No, I should do it because I'm older than Lincoln, so I should be in the club first," even though Lincoln has proven himself to be a capable babysitter as seen in Two Boys and a Baby. But then again, if I had to use a good example, I would also use something like Baby Steps, where even though Lincoln wasn't necessarily babysitting his sisters, he was looking after them very well. But no, the sisters decide to let Lin do it because she's being an idiot, and so they decide to let her babysit a family. This is when things start to go downhill. Every time Lin babysits a family, she comes across as the character that she usually is, someone who has no self-awareness of her actions and's trying to quote-unquote have fun with children when she's clearly not. I mean, the episode basically states that the family she babysits were mentally scarred by the actions that she did, and so the clients of the family decide to fire all of the sisters, not just Lin, all of them, even though they practically did nothing wrong, but I guess this season has a habit of just punishing characters for no reason. Understandably, the sisters don't want to let Lin babysit anymore, so she decides to go behind their back and lie to clients about how they're not available and that she can babysit more families instead. And for some odd reason, the episode is expecting me to sympathize with Lin throughout all of the things that she's doing. But how can you expect me to enjoy or sympathize with a character who's basically lying behind behind everyone's backs and acting like a complete asshole. So of course things get much worse, more clients fire the sisters, and they decide the best option is to let Lin babysit a family of children known as the Fox Quintuplets, who are very rowdy, loud, and reckless, kinda like Lin. And they've also given the 4 oldest sisters trouble in the past. So they send Lin there and it looks like she's about to have a terrible time, which the sisters are hoping for, but then, literally 5 seconds later, the sisters suddenly regret what they did. When I first watched this episode, I couldn't help but say to myself, no, don't feel sorry for Lin. She went behind your backs, she made things worse for you, and now all of a sudden you feel bad for her? So now the episode is essentially treating the sisters like they're the bad guys, like they did absolutely nothing wrong, you know, aside from trying to do their fucking job. So they decide to go and see what Lin's up to, and it turns out she's having a great time with the Fox Quintuplets. The sisters apologize for their actions. That's when the episode tries to have its obvious sympathetic moment, which is ruined by Lin punching each sister's arms, which kind of proves my point that Lin's a character that's probably never gonna have a sympathetic moment. Because, you know, it's Lin, we gotta have her showing her sympathy by just punching people. And yeah, she may have gotten the sisters' clients back, but I don't feel that makes up for all of her actions throughout the episode. That's because the episode tries to make it seem like Lin is completely innocent and that everything she did was totally justifiable because she needed a chance to be a good babysitter. But no, the episode clearly states that Lin is not a good babysitter, and the only reason why she became a good babysitter was just because she had a family that was just as bad as her. Which leads on to my next biggest issue with this episode, and this is the one that really pisses me off. It's the moral. All I got out of this moral was that all Lin needed was just a family that was as crazy as her. The problem wasn't with Lin, it's the wrong family that they chose. So essentially, this episode is actively saying that there's nothing wrong with Lin, she doesn't need to change, we should just accept the person that she is and make sure that all she needs is the right clients. Seriously? That's like accepting a murderer as a babysitter because he's babysitting a family that's just as psychopathic as him. I'm exaggerating on that part, obviously. I doubt anyone would ever want a murderer as a babysitter, but I'm just trying to prove my point. I do think this is a garbage house episode, and this may come off as a little personal to some people, but when I first saw this episode, I couldn't help but get the impression that it was trying to make me feel like I was wrong for hating Lin and that I should feel like there's nothing wrong about her, that she doesn't need to change. Now, I'm sure that was not an intention of the writers, but that's what it ends up feeling like to me. But the thing is, nobody's right or wrong with how they feel about a character. It's just an opinion. I may not like Lin, but I'm not going to stop people from enjoying her. In fact, if you're a Lin fan watching this and you saw this review, don't take it to heart. I'm not saying Lin fans are wrong, I'm just stating my personal opinion. If you enjoy Lin for who she is, that's wonderful. More power to you. I just think it's a little insincere for this episode to act like the Lin haters are wrong for how they feel about her. If you want Lin haters to enjoy Lin, you have to redeem her character or give her a complete turnaround. Having an episode acknowledge all of the things people don't like about Lin and then saying that there's nothing wrong with her and that all she needed was the right clients is not what you're supposed to do if you want to redeem a character. Again, I doubt that was the intention the writers were going for, but it could give off the wrong impression to those that don't like Lin and make it feel like they're wrong for not liking her. I'm not trying to say I'm right, I'm just trying to say that everybody's entitled to their own opinion and no one should be treated like the bad guy for how they feel. So while I do not like this episode, I can completely understand why some people can enjoy it. Episode 68B, The Spies Who Loved Me. Ronnie Ann wants to go downtown, but her grandparents think it's too dangerous, so they decide to spy on her. This is essentially the pilot episode to the Casa Grande spin-off, and it's not even trying to hide it as such. None of the Louds are in this episode. Well, Blinken's in the episode for a brief bit, but it doesn't really serve much to the story. It's mostly a Casa Grande's episode, which kind of makes me beg the question of why this is even considered a Loud House episode. I mean, maybe it's to give people an impression on what the Casa Grande special could be like, but I don't know, it just didn't feel that way for me. If you took the Casa Grandes out and replaced them with the Loud family, I don't think anything would change. If it was about Lincoln wanting to go somewhere and then the sisters are worried that he could get himself hurt hurt, so they tried to spy on him. That would play out exactly how this episode plays it. One of the issues I've always had with Loud House is that I've never really found Ronnie Ann very interesting as a character. In fact, I feel like all of her traits were sucked out in this episode because she essentially plays exactly like Lincoln. Sure, she skateboards at a few points and she saves her family, but that doesn't automatically make her stand out from Lincoln because I'm pretty sure he's done the same thing a few times. Not the skateboard part, I'm talking about saving his family or helping them out with something. I suppose it is great to see the Casa Grandes again, but even they feel a little dumber in this episode. Like how the grandfather thinks a rat ain't Ronnie Ann, and I didn't get the joke. And even though I still find Carl really funny as a character, I'll admit his macho personality thing is kind of getting old at this point. Otherwise, the story's just really predictable. Granted, I didn't fall asleep during this one like I did with Absent Minded, but I was somewhat close. I could predict exactly what was going to happen, I knew where things were going, it all played out so straight and there was nothing new or interesting that came out of it. There isn't even really anything I find annoying about this episode. It feels like just another perfectly average episode without anything interesting going for it. Results in a perfectly average house-esque episode. I do want the Casa Grande show to be good, but I want it to at least be interesting. Episode 69, Really Loud Music. Hoping to win a songwriting contest, Luna contemplates whether she should go with a song that's true to her sound or try to make something that the whole world will love. Okay, I'll stop. That's actually really bad. If there's any kind of episode I felt would have been perfect for a musical, it would definitely be a half-hour special. Although interestingly enough, when this episode was first announced by Chris Savino, it was originally going to be a rock opera special. I was a little iffy about that because I didn't feel Loud House would have taken that risk, but thankfully they didn't and simply went with just a musical episode. I'll talk more about the songs a little later on, but first I want to get into the story because I feel it's really important to discuss. So this episode starts with Luna making her own song and she's about to submit it, and then she begins to wonder if she can spice things up a little bit. When I first watched this episode, I couldn't help but feel that this kind of thing had been done before in Roadie to Nowhere, where Luna was questioning if she should pursue her life as a rock star. But then when I watched the episode again, I felt it was more that Luna was doubting whether or not her own music is good enough for people to listen to and that maybe she should spice things up. Which I feel does a good job at exploring more about Luna's character and who she wants to establish herself as a person. I mean, at the end of Roadie to Nowhere, she's already satisfied a large audience, so now her next biggest step is deciding what kind of genre of music she should go for. Eventually, Luna does find something that's good for her and lands herself a spot in the show, but the producers decide to make her look marketable and appealing to fans, so they dress her up as a character known as Lulu. And yes, I'll admit that Lulu is really funny to look at. But this also gets to the point where the co-hosts reveal their true colors by threatening to not let Luna play at all unless she keeps that atrocious outfit on. But at this point, the producers start to show their true colors by saying that if Luna goes with her normal persona, they won't ever let her play. This is when Luna learns her lesson that you shouldn't sell yourself out just to get fame and fortune. It's one thing to appeal to people's interests, but no one should have to live a life as some sort of second person all because of what your boss thinks is acceptable. This reminds me of what my favorite band Queen went through when they wanted to produce a song that the co-hosts weren't really fond of, but yet it ended up becoming a worldwide success. Something you would know if you've seen the movie Bohemian Rhapsody, and I think something like this fits perfectly with Luna's character. Even though I'll admit I think it was done better in Bohemian Rhapsody, seeing someone like Luna go through this arc is understandable enough. That being said though, I thought the ending was a bit of a cop-out, where Luna decides to just be herself while performing for a large crowd, and yet she still gets disqualified from the judges. Which doesn't really make any sense, because if the audience loved her, wouldn't that mean that they want her to win? The producers turned her into a pop star so that the audience would love her and it would make her an easy candidate to win. Yet Luna performs as herself, the audience still loves her, and she still ends up being disqualified and gets nothing. The ending would have been more satisfying if things were left more open-ended and it was hinted that Luna might become very famous in a future episode. But instead it just felt like a massive cop-out and a very safe, predictable ending. It is a shame too, because despite me thinking this is a Glory House episode, I thought the ending just wasn't satisfying. Despite a bad ending, it still had a pretty decent story. But now I'm done talking about the episode, let's play the fun card for a minute and talk about the songs in the episode. Well, I'll just go right off the bat in saying that my favorite song is What Have I Done, performed by Luna towards the very end of the episode, where she questions whether or not her persona, Lulu, Lulu is good enough for the audience. I love the visuals they had for it, the lyrics were really good, and I love Luna's singing as usual. It's kind of proof that Nickelodeon is a very good singer. In terms of the other songs, the only other ones I found good were Play It Loud, What Everybody Wants, and Luann's Laugh Parade. Those were songs I really enjoyed because they had nice lyrics and fun visuals. I thought That's Our Kinda Song was okay, and Changing Luna was a nice beat, I suppose, but every other song in this episode was bad, and they added literally nothing to the story. I get that this is a musical number and they wanted to have all of the characters singing, but not only does it come out of nowhere, but it gets really annoying very quickly. Throughout the first half of the episode, every character breaks into song and there's no break from it. It's just song after song after song. My least favorite song by far was Song of Silence from Lucy, because I'll give the other ones credit that at least the characters were actually singing, but Lucy's song? No, she's not singing at all. She's just talking normally. You know how people are complaining about the Be Prepared song in the new Lion King remake and how it doesn't sound like Scar singing at all? That's what Song of Silence is. It's just Lucy talking and it doesn't even feel like a song. I also really hated Lisa's song where she's constantly rapping in front of the screen and I could barely tell the lyrics that she was singing. And I don't know if this is an unpopular opinion or not, but the song Best Thing Ever was just awful. Not just for the fact that I'm not a fan of kiddie pop songs and I find them really obnoxious, but I hate how this episode implies that every single person in the world loves this song. Every other song in this episode was just bad, but not necessarily terrible. Although funny enough, when I first saw this episode, I initially thought Leni's singing was good, but rewatching it nowadays, yeah, I kinda wish I didn't say that. So in total, I did think this was a decent musical episode, but not only were some of the songs not great to listen to, but it's just that ending that really frustrated me, and I literally have no idea where else they're gonna go with Luna's character. I don't even know what kind of episode season 4 is gonna bring to the table. I mean, maybe they'll focus more on Luna's relationship with Sam, but I'm not sure. At the very least, I'm glad this was a decent episode, but I wish it was a little stronger. Episode 70A, House of Lies. After witnessing an excessive lying in the family, Lisa invents lie detecting glasses to try and curb the fibs. I think the strongest part of this episode, surprisingly enough, is Lisa's development. Never at one point does she come off as an unlikable character who's only doing said actions just to benefit herself, but more so she's doing so because she thinks it would help the family out, when in actuality it doesn't. I like how the episode was trying to balance out its moral by saying that general lying isn't okay, but a few white lies won't hurt anyone. I mean, if you had a toddler who showed you a really crappy painting and asked for your opinion, would you say it's bad and make the child upset, or would you say, yeah, it looks great, you should keep doing it? And much like Lisa, thankfully nobody comes off as unlikable in this episode, despite how frustrated they're getting with the fact that their lies are no longer hidden, which was my initial worry going into this episode, but it never went in that direction and I'm thankful for it. Unfortunately, what brings this episode down isn't really anything offensive, but more so that the story is just kind of predictable. And sadly, the comedy isn't strong enough to help it in that regard. But I thought the way the family destroyed the lying detectors was kind of clever. I'm gonna give this episode a fairly high average house rating. It probably would have got a glory house rating if the story was more interesting or if it was at least a little funnier, but for what it is, I think it's worth at least another rewatch at some point. Episode 70B, Game Boys. Lincoln asks to borrow Clyde's new gaming system, but Clyde struggles to trust it's safe with him. So as a Nintendo fanboy myself, it was really fun to discover all of the little Easter eggs this episode had to Nintendo, like how the episode itself is literally called Game Boys, the title card has artwork of Lincoln and Clyde dressed as the Super Mario Brothers, or how the system that Clyde has is called the Snap, which is clearly a reference to the Nintendo Switch. If you're a Nintendo fanboy like myself, it'll be really fun to point out all of the little references this episode has going for Nintendo. And this actually might sound rare to say, but this is one of the few episodes where Clyde was actually really funny. To the point where I wish they did this thing more with his character, how he's more paranoid about something bad happening that he tries everything he can to make sure something bad doesn't happen. It has a lot of comedic potential and it fits perfectly with Clyde's character. There's no unnecessary nosebleeding, there's no Clyde trying to act cool or stuff like that, or him just going along with Lincoln's plans. He's his own character in this situation, and it plays so well in favor of the plot. And what makes that better is that Clyde's actions never come across as annoying. I love some of his attempts to make sure that the snap doesn't have anything bad happen to it, even if it's something as simple as juice. I love the part when Clyde tries to drink pickle juice out of Leni's jug, and then when she pours more in, he literally drinks the entire jug within less than a second, even if it was just a little bit of juice. That was amazing. And even despite Clyde's little drama, the rest of the episode was thankfully also just as funny. I love how Lincoln comes off as a very irresponsible kid who doesn't really know about his general surroundings because he's so attached to a video game. That may seem a little out of character considering Lincoln's always the responsible one, but I think it works well decently into the story. Hell, I wasn't even bothered by Leni in this episode. Yes, she does get angry at Lincoln twice, but even for someone who hates Luna's scene in GarageBand, I thought these scenes were funny. In fact, I can say the only joke I didn't like in this episode, which may come off as a little unsurprising, was the fart joke from Lynn, where Clyde's hiding under the table and then she farts right in his face and says tops to the chef or something like that. I thought this was a great episode. The personality contrast between Lincoln and Clyde bounce off each other perfectly, and it never gets to the point where it's annoying. I can comfortably say that this is by far the best Clinker McCloud episode the show has to offer. I really hope the show continues in this direction for Clyde's character, because we could get some potentially funny story ideas, and if they're combined with Clyde's dad's, oh boy, it's gonna be comedy gold. Episode 71A, Everybody Loves Leni. Torn between her work friends and her school friends, Leni tries to bring everyone together. I'm sorry if this may sound like I'm jumping to conclusions too quickly, but Everybody Loves Leni? What an appropriate title, because I absolutely adore this episode. I think what I like most about it is its more down-to-earth and slice-of-life tone, something that I always felt like Loud House excels at best when it's most used. There's no unnecessary mud monsters, there's no weird road trips, there's no time travel, it's just characters doing normal things, talking to each other like normal people would, no out-of-context situations or cartoony behaviors. It's a slice-of-life story through and through with nothing complicated in between. It's a very simple setup and I adore it for that. And much like Shop Girl, I love how this episode once again doesn't really treat Leni like an obstacle but more as her own character. She's a character who wants everybody to be happy and get along with each other, and she'll feel torn if that doesn't go through. And it never comes across as irritating. Leni knows full well that both of her friend groups are very different from each other, so she figures the best solution is to try to get them to get along with each other. Although when I first saw this episode, I was a little confused by the fact that Leni's friends didn't consist of characters that she already knows. Like, where's Becky? Where's Dana? Where's Chaz? They're clearly school friends of hers, and yet they're not really seen. That didn't really bother me too much because even as characters who serve to the story, Jackie and Mandy are pretty cute characters. Now, speaking of Leni's friends, do I think they're unlikable or petty? Well, personally, no. Because first off, Leni's friends don't really know each other very well and get the impression that they might be trying to steal Leni from each other. It's established in the episode that both sides have a very close friendship with Leni and they would hate to lose her as a friend. Sometimes you just gotta accept the fact that not everybody's going to like each other. They have their own differences. They have their own tastes that others won't agree on. They may not like their persona or stuff like that. It's not necessarily wrong to not like people. Believe me, I'm a person who doesn't like plenty of people if they tend to annoy me, and I think that alone is what distracts Leni's friends from realizing that what they're doing is causing Leni to be sad. And even so, Leni does call her friends out on their behavior in the episode. Well, sort of. She more so acknowledges that the only reason they don't like each other is because she's trying to bring them together. Still, it does make Leni's friends realizing how much of idiots they're being and apologize to Leni for their behavior. I personally didn't find Leni's friends annoying or selfish. I found them pretty amusing, and the banter they had between each other was pretty funny. Like I said before, I just adore this episode. I feel like this does a lot of things right that Friendzy did wrong. It may make the characters seem very selfish and unlikable, but here it's actually written off to come off as enjoyable, whereas in Friendzy it was more frustrating and sucked out all the character personalities that the characters had. I never found Leni's friends to be unlikable, and the rest of it was just so well done and so fun that I couldn't care less. Episode 71B, Middlemen. When Lincoln and Clyde go to tour the middle school, Lynn gives them some questionable advice. So one thing I've always wanted to see in Loud House is characters actually growing up, them going to new places that they've never been before. It's a little something of mine that I've always had since season 2. I've always wanted to see characters going to new places and them aging throughout the series. Like, it'd be nice to see Laurie going to college or Lincoln and Clyde going to middle school, which is something that they've confirmed to be doing in season 5, but better late than never, I suppose. What's bad about it though is that even after me really wanting to see these kind of plots being done, I don't think Middlemen handled it very well. Even though I like the idea of Lincoln and Clyde going to middle school just so they can learn what they're supposed to do there, it comes off as a joke and isn't really played seriously for me. That's because all of Lincoln and Clyde's attempts to blend in with the middle school kids came off as a joke and wasn't taken seriously. I mean, the conflict they end up getting towards the end is all purely out of stupid actions that they do. I never felt like the story execution was done genuinely. I get that it's progression for the characters, which while I do appreciate, doesn't automatically make it enjoyable. All of Lincoln and Clyde's attempts to blend in with the middle school kids was not funny, and I just felt so uncomfortable. I don't hate it for how it's executed in the story. It makes total sense why Lincoln and Clyde are trying to act tough, but when it tries to be funny, that's when it doesn't work. But I think it's time to address the biggest subject of this episode, and that's the stuff with Lynn. One of my main issues with Lynn is that I don't feel she's very fleshed out as a character. Like I said, she's only a stereotypical sports girl who thinks all the action she's doing is just for fun, even though they're really hurting people. Then again, she got her slow but steady development in net gains, and I was hoping to see her finally fleshed out in this episode. But here's the problem. It's a good idea, I get what the writers were going for, but the execution wasn't the best. You see, throughout the episode, Lynn is trying to give Lincoln and Clyde some advice so they don't end up like these students that she mentions throughout the episode, but as it turns out, those students are not real. All the things that happened was actually to her. When she first started middle school, she was constantly picked on and bullied by other people, so she felt the best solution for her was just to act as tough and mean as them. On the one hand, I completely understand what the writers were going for. They were trying to make us feel sorry for Lynn for the actions that she did, and that the only reason she acts like a bully was because she was bullied when she started middle school. And if the backstory was simply trying to show the reasons why Lynn acts the way she is, then I think that's fine. But on the other hand, if it was also trying to excuse all of the bad things that Lynn does in the past, then I don't think it works very well. If it was coming off as development, it doesn't work, because yeah, now we know the reasons why Lynn acts like a jerk, but that doesn't excuse why she does it in the first place. She's still giving questionable advice to her brother that could potentially lead him into getting hurt. Just because you were bullied back in school and you're trying to toughen up does not give you a reason to bully those that you love. It doesn't excuse the actions that Lynn does in episodes like Sitting Bull or Space Invader or No Such Luck. In fact, now that I think about it, why would she want to be a bully to her own family? I can understand her doing something like that in middle school, but at her own home, surrounded by those she loves? I'm sorry, but that doesn't really excuse it. Again, I'm looking at this from two completely different perspectives. It's not quite clear on what the episode is trying to do, but if they're gonna go down in the direction where they want to flesh out Lynn's character, then I'm open for it. And to its credit, it's not as badly done as it is in Sitting Bull, where it tried to make it seem like there's nothing wrong with Lynn and all she needed was the right family. But don't try to excuse the bad things she does by simply just saying that she was bullied in the past. If that's what the writers think counts as character development, then I don't see it. Lynn's backstory isn't the biggest problem with this episode, everything else is. And it's a shame, because I wanted to see an episode about Lincoln and Clyde finally growing up and going to middle school, but this episode treats it so much so as a joke that I can't give it anything else other than a garbage house rating. When simply judging it as an episode on its own, I think it fails in a lot of areas, because the comedy here simply isn't funny enough and the story isn't interesting. And like I said about Lynn's backstory, I'm looking at that aspect from two completely different points of view. And if the writers want to make Lynn seem more likable, then all they have to do is just tone down her sporty and arrogant behavior and make her seem more like a sympathetic character who also just likes to have fun. Add some weight to her character. I mean, they managed to do it with Lola, so why can't they do it with Lynn? Episode 72A, Jeers for Fears. After agreeing to go to the Royal Woods House of Terror, Lincoln and Clyde have to toughen up and face their fears. Fun fact, this episode was originally titled Utter Terror, as in utter terror, meaning that the episode could have actually taken place at Dairyland. In that essence, it could have actually been really funny to see Lincoln and his family go to Dairyland during Halloween and there's all these scary elements and they get scared from everything in all these wacky and cartoony ways. I don't know if that would have been better or worse than the episode we actually got, because honestly, Jeers for Fears is one of the few episodes where throughout the entire thing, I was annoyed. And I mean really annoyed. Let me talk about the good things first. One thing I really like is the colors that they use for the animation. Sure, it may be the same budget and style that Loud House is commonly known for, but I like the color choices they have to represent the scary elements of the House of Terror. Outside of that aspect though, the only other part I kind of liked was when Lily was dressing up as a wolf, but that's about it. So why was I mostly annoyed throughout this episode? It's all because of Lincoln and Clyde. It's not very often I see an episode where I'm annoyed by both Clyde and Lincoln, but this may just be the worst example. It's just Lincoln and Clyde are trying to act tough, they see something that scares them, they scream, they sometimes run around and faint, and that's it. They repeat the same joke over and over again, and it gets so annoying extremely quickly. What's even worse is that there are barely any other gags that play into the episode. I'll give Tricked credit and say that episode at least had a better executed story and at least focused on other characters so that we could see what they were doing. But when you have an episode that's spending 90% of its time on these screaming idiots, I can't stand it. Even other characters that appear don't really get much to do. I'm glad the sisters are only scaring Lincoln and Clyde just so they can toughen themselves up and not because they're trying to be mean, but they pretty much serve nothing to the plot. I suppose Bobby was kind of used well in this episode, but he doesn't serve much to it either. And just when things couldn't get worse, Chandler from The Waiting Game makes a reappearance in this episode. I hated him before in that episode, and I still hate him here. And this story also has one plot hole that really irritated me. Bobby decides to take Lincoln and Clyde to the House of Terror so they can see that everything is fake, but then the next night, the workers had to change it because there were these kids that saw the place and realized it was fake. But the problem is, who else was there? The only ones there were Lincoln, Clyde, and Bobby, but it's not like Bobby told them that Lincoln and Clyde knew the place was fake. And even if he did tell them, that wouldn't bother the workers so much because he used to work there. He's simply showing them that all of this stuff is fake. So who else was there to notice that it was fake? It makes no sense. I don't really have much else to say because this episode has practically nothing to offer other than being one of the most obnoxious episodes in the entire series. Seriously, Lincoln and Clyde were so annoying I'd much rather spend 2 hours at a toddler's birthday party. This is definitely a Garbage House episode and surprisingly much inferior to Tricked. I may not like Tricked that much, but at least it had some good elements like the song and some of the character subplots. But outside of the animation visuals in this one, there was nothing that stood out to me. And it didn't matter because I was mostly irritated thanks to Lincoln and Clyde's stupid behavior. And when that's your only running gag for an episode, that's when things get a lot worse. Episode 72B, T-Tail Heart. Lola discovers Lucy has an old fragile doll and decides she must borrow it no matter what Lucy says. So this episode is kind of a play on those typical horror movies about some possessed doll that's trying to hunt someone down or kill them. I mean, I don't know the full story in that regard because I'm not the biggest fan of horror movies myself. And to the episode's credit, I was still interested in seeing how it would turn out, not just because it turned out to be a Lola episode, but because it was centered around the theme of Halloween. And after how bad Jeers for Fears was, I just needed something a little more terrifying. I wouldn't go as far as to say T-Tail Heart is a scary episode, but it does have some creepy atmosphere. Never to the point where it comes off as terrifying for children to understand. Essentially, what happens is that Lola actually ends up ruining Lucy's doll, so when she tries to replace it, she also tries to get rid of the old one. But no matter how many times Lola tries to get rid of it, it still manages to return to her, and you physically see her getting more and more insane after every attempt. I love the detail in which Lola gets more and more more messy the more time she screws up, kind of like a representation of the doll itself. And I really like the twist at the end, where it turned out the only reason the doll was back in Lola's possession was because Lana, for some reason, managed to find the doll in those locations, and just assumed that it must have belonged to Lola because I'm guessing it was just as messy as her or something. And for as small as it is, I also liked the scenes with Lucy and Lola bonding together. It's not very often you get to see Lucy in the role of a bigger sister. And even if he didn't have that much to do, I still enjoyed the role that Flip provided, even though the scene where he had his feet on a sausage griller was kind of gross. I'm also not too fussed about Lincoln being in the episode because he pretty much serves absolutely nothing and is just kind of standing there because I guess they wanted to tell some jokes with him or something, and they tried to give an excuse as to why he's there, but it's not like he actually serves anything to the story. It was still an enjoyable episode with a creepy atmosphere and a genuinely good twist at the end, and still manages to bring out the best in Lola's character. Episode 73, The Loudest Thanksgiving. Faced with spending Thanksgiving apart, Lori and Bobby tried to bring their crazy families together for the first time. If I could sum up an episode that had so much wasted potential, it would have to be this episode. I love the idea of both the Louds and the Casagrandes finally meeting each other for the first time. The potential there was to have their crazy personalities bouncing off of each other in their own ways that fit their characters, and especially given that this is a Thanksgiving episode, the potential for comedy was so strong, but the actual plot to this episode begins no more than 13 minutes into the special. The first half of the episode mostly consists of the Louds and the Casagrandes trying to convince Lori and Bobby to stay for Thanksgiving, or trying to convince their certain partners to come over for Thanksgiving, and it goes absolutely nowhere. It's not funny, it wastes time, and just goes on for so long. And by the time the episode even gets to its crazy Thanksgiving concept, it only goes on for like 5 minutes before the rest of the episode is focused on trying to make some sort of conclusion to give everybody a happy ending. Which I will say the best part about the episode was actually how the story was executed. The episode is once again told through flashback, kind of like Friendzy, but from the perspective of Flip, which at first didn't really make a lot of sense when beginning the episode, but then it turns out the only reason he's telling the story is because Lori and Bobby are actually at his place because they're so fed up with the chaos at home. It's just a shame that the story that Flip ends up telling goes absolutely nowhere and isn't very funny. Let alone the fact that the conflict in this episode is just about how Lori and Bobby don't want to spend Thanksgiving apart from each other. You know, it doesn't matter if you're not spending Thanksgiving with your family, what's more important is spending time with your partner. And you know, I wouldn't mind that so much if Lori and Bobby were actually engaged, but they're not. They're still a young couple, so how am I supposed to care? But what hurts the episode the most is that it's not even trying to have fun with itself. It's yet another one of those stories that's trying way too hard to tell a message and trying to have fun with itself. That might explain why the first half only consists of the Louds and Casagrandes trying to convince Lori and Bobby to stay on Thanksgiving or some shit like that. That's the only reason why the actual story of the episode begins no less than 13 minutes into the actual episode. If it was just more concerned with trying to have fun with itself and telling a story with these characters' personalities bouncing off of each other, then the conflict itself probably would have started at least 3 minutes into the episode. There was no need for all of this drama going on, no need to sort some sort of conflict, just have the solution start from the beginning of the episode so it's already established what exactly is going to happen. But no, the episode itself is too focused on telling a moral that it ends up hurting the quality of the execution. And it doesn't help that it also makes the episode extremely predictable. And am I the only one that felt the animation was kind of off in this episode? I mean, not only do some characters look a little out of place or differently designed, but I noticed a lot more animation errors here than in most other episodes, including the most infamous error where Luna is literally the exact same height as Lori. She's even taller than Leni, who's in the exact same frame as her. Though I will admit, I did kind of like the cute little banter that Lincoln and Ronnie Ann had with each other in the episode. Even as someone who's not a fan of the shipping, the little banter they had each other was pretty cute. And I'll be honest, the song at the end was kind of nice, but even ending the episode on a happy note doesn't really save everything else. I think this is an average house episode. The conflict adds absolutely no suspense, and it's way too focused on trying to tell a moral that the fun part doesn't even begin until 13 minutes into the special. There was so much wasted potential with this story. I want to see the Louds and Casagrandes meeting each other again, but given given the positive vibe they now give off each other, I'm not so sure about that statement now. Episode 74A, Predictability. After discovering he has rituals, Lincoln worries he's predictable and vows to change it up. The concept for this episode seems a little odd. Has anyone at the age of 11 ever had rituals before? It's not uncommon for anyone to have rituals, but for an 11-year-old child, especially someone like Lincoln Loud, it just seems a little confusing to me. And I can easily sum up this episode thanks to its title. It's a very predictable episode. And in that sense, there's not really much I can say about it because with a predictable episode, you pretty much already know the problems that are at hand here. There's no stakes or surprises, there's no interesting character flaws, nothing interesting comes out of this episode. And I'm mostly talking about the dream sequence where we see Lincoln trying to do a bunch of crazy things and everybody else he knows is sick of it and saying that it's too boring. Which kind of segues into the moral of the episode, where you don't need to be interesting if you want to be an enjoyable person to hang around. It almost kind of comes off as a metaphor to how most people feel about certain episodes of The Loud House. And it's like this episode is saying, it doesn't matter if it's predictable, you should still enjoy it for what it is. But here's the problem. As I've said many times in the past, a predictable story is never a bad thing as long as the characters are likable, the writing is good, and the comedy is funny. I mean, even movies like Big Hero 6, despite their extremely predictable story, are mostly saved thanks to how the characters are executed. The problem with predictable episodes of The Loud House isn't that they're predictable, but that there's nothing else good that those episodes offer. And this one is no exception. No interesting characters, no funny comedy, none of that. It's all 100% straight and feels like yet another episode that's just trying to get a message across. Except it's a message that doesn't work within context of predictable episodes because it doesn't matter if something's predictable. You just gotta make sure that everything else is at least enjoyable enough to warrant a rewatch. I did like Stella's role in the episode, but that's literally all I can say about it. It wasn't offensively bad, it wasn't excitingly good, it was painfully average. The gag with Lincoln trying on different clothes didn't get a laugh out of me, but Clyde's gag was the worst. I hate how clingy he is to Lincoln and trying so desperately to make sure that he stays exactly the same. This is coming from the exact same child that wanted to take a risk in Snow Way Down and is now more concerned about his best friend doing the exact same thing. But then again, it's Loud House. It kind of forgets about continuity, so I shouldn't be that surprised. Episode 74B, Driving Ambition. When Laurie finds out that the golf coach from her dream college is coming to see her play, she develops the yips. It's really saying something when one of the best parts about this episode involves Lynn. I'm not even joking, the sequence with Luna, Lynn, and Lola trying to help Laurie with her anxiety was actually really well done. That even included my favorite joke in the episode where Luna learns to play her harp calmly and then destroys it after her performance. And in terms of Lynn's role, I kind of wish I got to see more of her in this situation. She does help Laurie in a way that involves her sporting activities, but she doesn't do it in a way where she comes off as egotistical or arrogant. She's simply just trying to help her sister out with an example that she had in the past. And when it comes to how Lola helps Laurie, this is when I start to begin my true issues with the episode. It's essentially as if Lola and Laurie swapped positions in this episode because the same advice that Lola gives Laurie is the exact same that Laurie gives Lola in Gown and Out, which segues into the rest of the episode because it falls into the exact same trap as predictability, a story that had a predictable setup but has nothing interesting to offer. And I'm not saying that golf stories are boring. Any cartoon can pull off a golf story and make it really enjoyable. But Driving Ambition offers nothing interesting other than a rehash of Gown and Out, where Laurie is now in the same position as Lola in that episode. And yes, I know the situation Laurie's going through is a lot different than Lola's in Gown and Out, but it's still retreading a lot of the same aspects. And in terms of how Laurie's executed, I still fail to find her a very interesting character. I liked her role in Gown and Out because she was telling Lola about her backstory, about how she got over the yips, and even though she didn't win, she still had a good time. But now she's retreading a lot of the same aspects that Lola goes through, and I feel she tries way too hard to be funny. Especially in the second half of the episode where she starts going crazy and laughing maniacally, and it just came off as more sad than funny. And look, I know this is a comedy show, but suddenly forcing your characters to try and act funny does not automatically make it funny. Even the message of the episode is too similar to Down and Out, except now it all feels like a giant lie. Because all Lori needed was just a few hugs from her parents and being told that, oh, it's okay, everything's gonna get better by the end of it. I mean, in Down and Out, Lola lost, but she still learned to have fun with it at the end of the day. Instead, in this episode, Lori had to win the competition just so she could impress her coach, and learns absolutely nothing by the end of it. I think the ending would have been a lot better if Lori lost, but still managed to impress her coach, and she realizes that she doesn't have to be number one just so she can impress people. Yeah, it would be kind of predictable, but it would at least make sense within the context of the story. Instead, it comes off as cheesy and phoned in. And dare I say anything about Lincoln's role in the episode? Not only does he serve absolutely nothing to the story, but my god, the comedy that he has is so unfunny. I love how this show is 3 seasons in and it still hasn't properly figured out how to do butt monkey jokes. Essentially what Lincoln does in the episode is he wants to help Lori out with golfing so he can make money off of it in the future. Except as a result, he ends up getting punished and beaten and hurt and humiliated in all these stupid ways that it just doesn't come off as funny. If you want to make Lincoln's humiliation funny, you need to have him act like an asshole at the beginning of the episode, but nope, all he's trying to do is help his sister and he still has to suffer for it. Every time Lincoln gets punished, it's so unfunny, and sometimes it doesn't even make sense. Like at one point he grabs a golf ball, but then his shirt gets caught by a windmill, and I'm just thinking to myself, where's the joke? What's the point? How is this supposed to be funny? I went back and forth on what rating to give this episode, but I'm sorry, I think this is a garbage house episode. A pretty light one, to be fair, because there's not really anything in the episode that outright offended me, just a lot of aspects that really annoyed me. Not to mention how much of a rip-off it is to Down and Out. A much better episode with a better use of its moral. Episode 75A, Home of the Fave. After a pun-filled trip to the grocery store with Luann and Lola, Dad worries Lola thinks he plays favorites. This episode could have very easily been a bad one. The setup was initially worrisome for me because it felt like the siblings were going to be fighting over who's actually the favorite, and the first 2 minutes of the story did not have the best impact on me personally. I'm mostly fine with Luann making a bunch of puns, but doing so at such a rapid pace isn't very funny to me. I may have just said that the first 2 minutes was annoying, but the difference is that unlike other episodes, the annoyance levels was intentional. It was so it could play a crucial part to the delivery of the story. Even though Luann and Lola are mentioned in the plot, they actually don't play a major part in the episode. Even the scenes with Lynn Sr. spending time with Lola didn't go on as long as I thought it would. And it also helped that those scenes were pretty adorable. Oh, and by the way, Lynn Sr. is the best princess, period. It makes a lot of sense why Lynn Sr. would be feeling this way, as his dad used to play favorites with him when he was a little boy. And it gets to the point where now he's doing this with every sibling in the family. And I'll admit, it did come off as a little repetitive, but like I said, it did play a crucial part to the story, and for the most part, the scenes with Lynn Sr. spending time with the siblings was pretty amusing. And I'm not gonna lie, even Lynn managed to get a laugh out of me. When she's eating the sandwich, it reminded me a lot of Pac-Man. And the ending was really nice too. It turns out the siblings were only sad, not because Lynn Sr. was playing favorites, but because something bad happened to them on that day. I'm glad it never got to the point where the siblings were now fighting for Lynn Sr.'s attention, because if it went in that direction, this episode could have easily been a lot worse. For the most part, I enjoyed this episode. It's a little repetitive to be sure, and the first 2 minutes do come off as annoying, but if you understand that this plays a crucial part to the story and you can easily tolerate it, then I think you'll be in for a fun ride. Episode 75B, Hero Today, Gone Tomorrow. When Lynn's friend Margot is celebrated for a 1 in a million soccer goal, Lynn has to try and be supportive. Alright, let me address the elephant in the room. I don't think Margot is very interesting as a character. And I bring this up because a lot of people were so concerned about wanting to see her return in a future episode. She's essentially the same character as Lynn, except not as jerkish and not as egotistical as her. So I suppose that makes Margot a more tolerable character than Lynn, but that doesn't automatically make her good. I don't find Margot funny or interesting or well developed. She's just kind of there as Lynn's friend, and that's it. She left no impact on me on other episodes, and that still applies here. But in terms of the episode, I do like how the story is played into Lynn's character. I like the message it's going for, where even if your best friend is in the spotlight, you should still be supportive. I think a moral like that fits her character perfectly. And when it comes to Lynn, she isn't really annoying in this episode, except now she's just kind of uninteresting. But unlike other Lynn episodes, even though she does act like a jerk, she is called out on it and tries to apologize for her action. Granted, Lynn did sort of learn her lesson as well in Net Gains, but it was more plain and basic, and it was more about her learning it. She didn't really get called out for her bad behavior. So I think the idea of the story is fine and the moral is great, but the execution of said story is so repetitive. I may have complained about Homer the Fave having repetition, at least it played a crux to the story, but not in this episode. I'm not joking when I say that 80% of this episode plays out exactly the same as its former scene. The episode starts off with many soccer fans praising Lynn as a hero, which is a trope I'm just sick of. Like, why do people always have to treat soccer like it's some sort of heroic sports event for them? Then Margot gets a goal in the next game, and so all of a sudden everybody's praising her, and Lynn gets jealous, and then in the next scene, Lynn gets a goal, she's once again praised, and Margot feels angry about it. It's all played out so straight, with no variety added to its execution. I was bored out of my skull while watching this for the first time. Granted, I didn't fall asleep like an absent-minded, but I was sort of close. And outside of a few characters, every supporting character gets so annoying because they praise Lynn and Margot like they're some heroic sports people that must have their names at Burpin' Burgers or some shit like that. It's like, we get it. Lynn likes sports. She's good at it. We're 3 seasons in. You think I wouldn't know that at this point? That feels like such an early 90s cliche that hasn't gone away. Despite that, though, I still thought this was just an average house episode. I can easily see this as being one of Lynn's better episodes, and to some degree I may prefer it over Net Gains, but Net Gains at least had a funny character and the story didn't feel so repetitive. Episode 76A, The Right Stuff. When Lucy quits the writing club at school due to the by-the-book way Huggins runs the club, Mum takes over. I like how we're getting an episode that explores more of Rita's trait of being a writer, something I don't think that's shown up very much since season 1. It's sort of nice whenever an episode establishes more aspects about a character's trait, but then again, Driving Ambition brought back Laurie's trait of golfing, and I didn't like that episode. It may not have the most interesting story and it does play off as pretty predictable, but how it's executed helps it a lot. Like I said, you don't need a good story to have a good episode. I like the contrasting writing styles that Rita and Principal Huggins has. Whereas Principal Huggins is more about making sure the sentences are grammarly correct, Rita's more about coming up with fun stories. And I like how the message is trying to balance both sides, where you should at least make your stories more fun and creative, but also try to make sure that they are grammarly correct. Something that I think No Guts No Glory failed to do miserably. I love the part when Rita's trying to come up with a distraction for Principal Huggins and then a tall guy comes out and speaks to him. In my head I was thinking, okay, this is some of the kids trying to disguise themselves as a tall guy, but no, it turns out it's an actual tall guy that she got to distract Principal Huggins. Though with that said, the goat gag didn't get a laugh out of me. I mean, it's been 6 years since that whole screaming goat gag thing came out and they're still using it today? I thought this was a good episode. The story isn't the most original and the execution isn't the best, but I liked the characters enough and the comedy was solid. Also, a lot of people have pointed out that there's a woman in this episode that bears a similar resemblance to Sam, and a lot of people thought that that was her mother. That may seem like a bit of a stretch, but it's something I just thought I'd mention anyway. And on that note, episode 76B, Racing Hearts. When Luna and Sam embark on a challenge taking place across Royal Woods, they discover they have less in common than they thought. So it took the crew 1.5 years for it to happen, but Sam from L is for Love is finally back. And they managed to give her not only a new voice actress, but a personality. I mean, let's be real, considering the small appearance that Sam had in L is for Love, it was almost impossible to determine any sort of personality other than the fact that she enjoys music, just like Luna does. And unlike characters such as Rusty or Margot, I really do tell a definitive personality from Sam. She plays more of a contrast to Luna's rocky and wild personality and comes off as more calm and collected. Like whatever Luna enjoys is more hardcore and intense, while something that Sam enjoys is more laid back and chill. And I think that's really important to the story because it needs to establish that Luna and Sam don't really have a lot in common, and we get to see the situation that unfolds before their eyes. Although I will admit, when I first watched this episode, I couldn't help but think to myself, these two don't have a lot in common, but don't they have some sort of association with music? Then again, it's not like it was an issue, because it's clear that Luna and Sam are trying to find more things they like together than just music. Evident by the end of the episode, when Luna and Sam realize that they don't really have a lot in common, but because they both enjoyed baking so much, maybe they'll find new things they enjoy together. And that ends up being the strongest part of the episode. Not only are Luna and Sam's relationship just adorable, but I was really interested in seeing where it was going. I was at least hoping that these two would have something in common so that they could stay together. And I'm gonna be completely honest, and I know this may sound a little extreme, but I personally think this is the best LGBT episode in any cartoon show. I know there have been other LGBT couples in shows like Steven Universe or The Legend of Korra, but the reason I love this one so much is because it's not trying to do anything extreme. It's simply doing the bare minimum. The episode itself knows full well that Luna and Sam are the same gender, and it doesn't make such a big deal out of it. It never goes to the point where it's like, oh look, we're a same-sex couple, love us! And plus the episode actually had the balls to use words like date and couple, something that Steven Universe didn't even do once. I mean, don't get me wrong, I like Steven Universe, but even I'll admit its LGBT representation wasn't the strongest, I feel. The best thing about it is that even if I wasn't a fan of Luna and Sam as a couple, I would still enjoy this episode regardless. And aside from that, there's still plenty of other things I enjoy. I think the episode itself is pretty funny. All of the different ways Luna and Sam try their activities while also failing to try something new was amusing to see. And what else stuck out to me was all the little background cameos. It was nice to see Lisa and Darcy together again. We got to see a few of the Louds in several moments. I will admit the actual episode itself is a little bit repetitive, but much like the Right stuff, it's not to the point where it's obnoxious or boring. I was still invested in this situation that Luna and Sam were going through and was really invested to see what they were going to do by the end of it. I was hoping that they'd overcome their problems and just stay together. The only other issue I have with this episode, and I'm sorry if this sounds extremely obvious, but I don't think Lynn needed to be in the episode. I mean, it's not like she does anything important in the story, but her role just wasn't very funny to me and came off as slightly irritating. All it reminds me is that this is the same character that I've been putting up with since season 1, and I doubt she's ever going to change. I loved this episode. Sure, it may seem a little corny in some places, but I just adore the relationship between Luna and Sam, and I was fully invested to see where the situation was going to go and if they were going to overcome that problem just to stay together. It's an adorable episode with adorable set pieces, adorable characters, and pulls off teen romance so well. Unlike episode 77A, Stage Plight. Hoping to get closer to her crush Benny, Luann tries out for the school play. So now we've come to the episode that for the longest time actually used to be the highest rated episode on IMDb, and even if it's not that nowadays, it's still pretty damn close. So was I one of those people that gave this episode a 10 out of 10 on that website? No, actually I didn't. I hate to say it, but I really did not like this episode, and I do consider it a garbage house one. Let's get the first issue out of the way. I'm not a fan of the romance in this episode. That wouldn't necessarily translate as an issue, given that I'm not a fan of Lincoln and Ronnie Ann's relationship, but I still enjoy episodes like Shell Shock. The problem is that the romance is handled so poorly in this episode that it doesn't come off as sweet and more, well, I hate to use the word, but cringeworthy. It's an episode that's trying way too hard to be sweet, and as a result doesn't leave off the same impact that Racing Hearts did. It wasn't an episode that was trying too hard to be romantic. It was simply trying to show the problems that a couple would normally have. It goes for all the same tropes like, oh, I want to be closer to this guy, or oh no, I'm so afraid to kiss him. These are the kind of romantic tropes that have been done so much since the late 90s. So nothing about this episode comes off as new or interesting interesting tries so hard to be that way that it doesn't leave off the same impact. All of this stuff I've seen so many times in other cartoons and done so much better. And in terms of the comedy, my god, this is one of the unfunniest episodes I've ever seen. You know you've done something wrong when the worst joke of the episode isn't even a joke involving emojis. I'm not even joking. At one point in the episode, Luann says that instead of kissing Benny, they should send each other kissing emojis. But what could possibly be worse than a joke that would even make the writers of the Emoji Movie blush? How about a sequence when Luann and Benny's puppets are moving on their own and Lola gets freaked out by it? I don't care if it was supposed to be a joke, it just feels like another example that the Loud House is on the edge of jumping the shark just to stay relevant. And on that note, yeah, Benny also has his own puppet because they needed to give him and Luann something in common so that they fall in love with each other. Which seems odd considering that the same writer that wrote this episode also wrote Racing Hearts, an episode where you don't need to have a lot in common to have a good relationship. But no, the episode had to give Benny the same interests as Luann just so it'd make more sense for them to get together. I also hate how this episode portrays all of the high school students like stereotypes where they have one speaking funny. I don't care if this is a cliche that's often done with most high school stories, it's not particularly funny. And speaking of not funny, dare I bring up the drama teacher? I'm so sick of cartoons having that over-the-top exaggerated drama teacher with a European accent. Whether it's a male or a female, I'm so sick of seeing it and it's not funny. The only joke they have with her character is that she's over-dramatic about everything and always likes to change things up, which leads to that damn emoji joke that I oh so love. But forget about the drama teacher. Mr. Coconuts is by far the most annoying character in the episode. Granted, I say character with air quotes because he's not necessarily alive, except for that damn ending. And I get why he's in the episode because it shows that Luann doesn't really have any friends, which seems a little bit like a stretch, but I guess that's understandable why he's there. But he has some of the worst lines in the episode and I just wanted to turn the audio down while I was listening to him. And you know what? For as much as I somewhat didn't like the repetition in Racing Hearts, I could easily toss that to the side because this episode is repetitive. It was so repetitive to the point that by the time the episode was around its ending point, I said to myself, wait, what? That's it? The episode barely did anything new with itself that by the time it reached the end, I didn't even realize it was already at the end. And no, the kiss at the end did not save anything. Yes, it was kinda cute to see, but Racing Hearts didn't have Luna and Sam kissing, but that didn't hurt the episode now, did it? And I'm sorry, but can we please stop turning Romeo and Juliet into a romance story for kids? If any of you have actually heard about Romeo and Juliet, you'd know exactly what happens at the end. And I do not find Benny very interesting as a character. I just don't. He's just the male version of Luann, and that's it. At least Sam was given enough personality to make her seem like a good contrast to Luna, but Benny's pretty much the same character, and he's so boring. If I could say one good thing about the episode is that Luann is at least tolerable, but it's not like she's a great character because she still goes through all of the same cliches that many romance cartoons have already done. So that doesn't really feel like a compliment at all. I get why a lot of people do like this episode, and I'm not saying they're wrong for liking it. More power to them. I just fail to see why the episode is so loved when it has this much bad content in it. The characters are annoying, the comedy is god-awful, and the cliches are all over the place. Episode 22B, Affair to Remember, when Lincoln and Bobby wait, hold on. I just realized this is the wrong episode. Oops, my bad. The actual episode is episode 77B, Antiqued Off. When Clyde and schoolmate Zach begin bonding over a mutual interest in antiques, Lincoln quickly finds himself feeling like a third wheel. Alright, let's get the obvious problem out of the way if the joke wasn't obvious enough. This episode is Affair to Remember, through and through, with nothing interesting being added to it. Except in Affair to Remember, there was an actual conflict going on when there's barely anything that's happening in this story. In fact, now that I think about it, why is the drama the fact that Clyde and Zach are starting to hang out with each other? Aren't they already friends at this point? Why else is Zach in Lincoln's friend group? Not even Stella and Flip could save this episode. I mean, yeah, it's great to see them again, but they add nothing to the story. It really sucks because despite how much of a good character Stella is, she's only been in mediocre and bad episodes so far. And in terms of how Zach is portrayed, at least I can somewhat tell him apart, but that still doesn't give him a defining character. I mean, at least unlike other episodes suppose I can at least tell Zach apart from the other group now because I guess he's the weirdo. But then again, none of Lincoln's friends have much of a personality. You got Rusty who's the ladies man, Zach who's the weirdo, Leon's the one with the southern accent, and Stella's the girl. You know, I'm really missing Girl Jordan at the moment. Wait, I'm sorry. Was I supposed to be talking about the story? Well, it's kind of hard to because there's nothing more I can say about it. If you've already seen A Fair to Remember, you've already seen this episode. There's no new surprises, no scenes feeling like they were redone. It all feels like a retread of A Fair to Remember, and it's not even trying to hide it. I mean, the only really new thing I got out of the plot was that Lincoln's all of a sudden now into magic shows, but it feels like they're just adding a bunch of random things to his character because they wanted to make him more interesting. The only new aspect I got out of the story here was the message, but unfortunately, that ends up being the worst part of the episode. Let me explain. Lincoln tries to invite all of his friends to the magic show because Clyde doesn't want to go, but it turns out they're actually at Flip's place and admit that they lied to him that they don't actually like magic shows. And when they ask why Lincoln didn't invite Clyde, it's because Clyde was doing something with Zach. That is until Lincoln realizes that Clyde actually doesn't like magic shows and only pretended to go just so he could be a good friend to Lincoln. So Lincoln decides that he should pretend to like antiquing just so he and Clyde can continue to get along. While I don't think the execution of said message is as bad as Fandom Pains, I still think it's bad regardless. It's like it's telling kids that it doesn't matter if you're not into something that your friend is, you should just pretend to like it just so you can continue hanging out with each other. But that doesn't necessarily lead to a healthy friendship. And wouldn't it be better if Lincoln and Clyde say, oh, I don't know, tried to find new things that they can enjoy together, kind of like what Racing Hearts did? I don't really have much else to say about this episode. It's a garbage house episode, mostly thanks to the fact that it's retreading a lot of the similar aspects to A Fair to Remember and adds absolutely, and I mean absolutely, nothing new to it. Yeah, it might be great to see Stella and Flip again, but that doesn't automatically make it good. Episode 78. Cooked. I'm really getting sick of episode titles having an ED at the end of a word. Anyway, the kids promise to help Dad with the grand opening of his new restaurant by coming up with promotions, but their lack of teamwork and crazy promos lead to an ultimate nightmare in the kitchen for Dad. So even as someone who doesn't like most of A Fridge Too Far, I still stand by that one of the strongest aspects of the episode was Lin Sr.'s subplot in wanting to open up his own restaurant. So it's nice to see an episode that continues an overarching plot about Lin Sr. wanting to open his own restaurant. And in terms of quality, I'd say I prefer Cooked over A Fridge Too Far, but I wouldn't really say that's much of a compliment because I still don't think this episode is anything special. And on that note, I don't even think this is one of those episodes that really needs to be a special. What do I mean by that? Well, let's properly dissect this episode first. The first half of this episode is awful. I know it sounds like I'm jumping to conclusions right away, but I hated the first half of this episode. Everything about it is terrible. Of course it's gonna go down the direction where the siblings don't agree with each other on their own ideas, so they end up arguing with each other and of course proceed to fight. I don't care if this is something that Loud House is most common with nowadays, I'm just so sick of it. We've had so many episodes about the siblings disagreeing with each other, let alone this season with Friendzy, so why do I need to see more of it? Not only does it help this episode's rather predictable story, but it just makes things even more frustrating. And I absolutely hated everything that was going on with Lincoln and Clyde. There was absolutely no reason to have them together in this episode. And that commercial that they showed off to Lin Sr. was just abysmal. I get that that was the joke to make it look awful, but that doesn't automatically make it funny. Then the second half of the episode plays out, and it's not as bad as the first half, but it's still pretty boring. I'll give it credit that it does give each sibling their own chance to shine, but how it plays into story isn't very well executed. It's all just, here's my idea, oh, let's listen to her idea as well. This episode feels as though it's trying to throw a lot on screen just to keep the kids' attention, because let's be honest, a lot of kids probably wouldn't be that interested in a cooking episode, so it ends up kind of making the episode look like junk food for a child's mind. It doesn't take any breaks with its constant rapid progression of ideas coming from the sibling, and the entire episode unfortunately feels that way. It's just extremely predictable, but it doesn't want to take any breaks with itself because it wants to keep the audience's attention. And to be honest with you, I don't even think this is the kind of story that needed to be 22 minutes. If they had just simply stripped the episode down to 11 minutes minutes and maybe the story was more about Lin Sina trying to impress a food critic, it would have been more interesting. Yeah, it would be kinda cliche, but it'd make the episode more interesting than what it already is. And comedy-wise, I didn't really get a lot out of this episode. I honestly couldn't remember one joke that got a good laugh out of me. It's just that boring. And that's how I feel about the episode. It's got a good idea, but execution-wise, it's all over the place. I admire it for giving each sibling a chance to shine, but there's no breaks from it. In the long run, I think it's an average house episode. Though, the one nice thing I can say about it is that the ending, while a little bit corny, is really sweet. It's a nice way to kick off this special, considering that this is the last episode of this season. I think it's pretty much the only thing I got out of it by the end. And that is every single one of the 48 episodes in the Loud House Season 3 reviewed. Let's take a look at the pie chart, and honestly, I couldn't believe how close together these episodes were in terms of numbers. 16 good episodes, 14 bad episodes, and 18 average episodes. Comparing it to Season 2's pie charts, there's a lot less good episodes, a lot more bad episodes, and especially a lot more average episodes. And in that respect, it's easy to say that Season 2 is obviously still better than Season 3 and the best season of the show by far. But most interestingly is that Season 3's pie chart is very similar to Season 1 from a statistical standpoint. In terms of actual episode numbers, they're pretty different from each other. Though part of that could be due to the fact that Season 3 has 4 specials, whereas Season 1 had none. That could likely be the only reason why the episode numbers are very different from each other. But in terms of actual quality, well, Season 3 definitely has one less bad episode than Season 1, but the difference between these two is that Season 1's bad episodes were really damn awful. Meanwhile, a lot of bad episodes in Season 3 were just kind of bad. Granted, there were a few episodes that really irked me, which I'll get to a little later on, but despite the large number, a lot of the bad episodes in Season 3 weren't really that bad. But the opposite can also be said for the good episodes. Not only does Season 1 have more good episodes than Season 3, but I personally think Season 1 also had better episodes. 1 just had a lot more iconic episodes that really stood out to me, whereas a lot of Season 3's episodes were mostly in the middle. And that's really the best way I can sum up Season 3. Not only does it have more average episodes, but even a lot of its bad and good episodes are leaning more towards the middle. There's a lot of bad episodes that aren't really that bad, but there's also a lot of good episodes that aren't really that good, with a few exceptions. But Season 1 and Season 3 also had problems of their own. One of Season 1's biggest problems was that it was far too mean-spirited in a lot of episodes. Meanwhile, Season 3 has a few mean-spirited episodes every now and then, but most of it is just kind of boring. So in that respect, I do think Season 1 is slightly better than Season 3, but that wouldn't make Season 1 a good season, because there's still a lot of really bad stuff to get through. In that aspect though, although I think Season 1 is better than Season 3, I'd likely say Season 3 is easier to sit through, considering most of it is in the middle. Anyway, as for the actual rating of the season, combined with the fact that I thought Season 3 was worse than Season 1 in a few areas, and also saying that a lot of the episodes were more in the middle, I think I'm pretty comfortable with saying that Season 3 is an average season. Season 1, despite its problems, had a lot more quality episodes for me to remember, but Season 3's quality just fell completely in the middle. Even despite a lot of its quality episodes, I wouldn't say they're masterpieces entirely. But that's not the only reason I felt so mixed on Season 3, and that leads me on to notes. Now, these first few notes aren't really anything to do with the quality of the season, just neat little things to mention. Firstly, there's a bigger focus on other characters this season. Season 1 and Season 2 mostly had episodes about Lincoln and the struggles that he was going through, or episodes about him dealing with a conflict between his sisters. But in this season, they've mainly stripped back on the whole Lincoln living with 10 sisters deal and focuses more on other characters, giving them their own spotlight. We got a lot of episodes about the sisters, a lot of episodes about the parents, a lot of episodes about characters at the school, and even got to see other characters returning for their own episodes, like Margot coming back for Hero today, gone tomorrow, or Sam coming back for Racing Heart. And of course the elephant in the room is that there are some episodes this season where Lincoln either doesn't appear at all or is only there for a cameo who doesn't even have any lines. And on that note, Lincoln feels more irresponsible. I mean, in season 1 alone, there were a lot of episodes about him trying to manage his sisters or being the first one to get up or some stuff like that. He was always the one that was solving issues. He's the man with the plan, as he always says. But in season 3, they've greatly stripped back Lincoln's responsible persona. Like how he's the last one to get out of bed in episodes like Rita Her Rights or Predictability, or when he's too deep into something he doesn't really notice the world around him, like in Game Boys. Most prominently, there's a lot of episodes where he's involved in the same chaos as the sisters, not really trying to solve it at all. Thirdly, there's a lot less Clyde x Laurie fanning, and thank God. Throughout this season, it only showed up twice, and one of them was in an alternate reality. Maybe the writers are more aware of how annoyed people are about Clyde having a crush on Laurie, so greatly tried to strip it back throughout the season. Now, these last 3 notes are major key factors into the quality of season 3, not just the quality of the episodes, but how the season has executed a lot of these stories. Firstly, there's a lot of plot recycling. Now, I've gone and said several times that even if an episode recycles a plot, as long as the execution is fine, then that's all that matters. But even if there were episodes that were better than the ones they were trying to copy, then they still fall into the same category. Whether it's the mad scientist copying GarageBand, Fandom Pains feeling like a ripoff of Spell It Out, Antiqued Off being a ripoff of Affair to Remember. Even episodes this season try to copy episodes from its own season, like Driving Ambition feeling like a ripoff of Gown and Out. It's really odd how we're only 3 seasons into the show, and yet it's already felt the need to copy its plot from other episodes. Secondly, I feel as though this season is trying to make the show way too cartoony. Now, saying that sounds dumb, I know, as The Loud House is a cartoon. But when it establishes its own rules on its reality and then tries to mess with it in other seasons, that's when it starts to become a problem. Season 1 and Season 2 felt much more slice of life and focusing on real life situations that a lot of people can relate to. Season 3, on the other hand, tries to have these wacky and over-the-top stories for the sake of trying to be funny, such as the overly worried actions in Pipe Dreams, the out-of-context situations in Ruthless People, the overly punishments in Pasture Bedtime, and of course all the wacky things that happened in Tripped. Not to mention a lot of the season is trying too hard to seem different from the others that it feels like it's now trying to jump the shark. Season 2 had a few of this as well, but it's nowhere near as prominent as it is here. Whether it's the ending of Stage Plight where the puppets talk, and of course the time travel scene in The Mad Scientist. It causes Season 3 to feel more like a diversion from the other seasons because it's trying too hard to be different from them. And lastly, I feel as though the season is relying too much on telling morals. Now, to its credit, Season 1 and Season 2 sort of had this problem as well. A lot of episodes that weren't really trying to have fun with themselves and more so just trying to get across a moral that the kids can understand. But the problem has become way more prominent in Season 3. A lot of episodes are trying too hard to tell a moral than simply having fun with itself. I mean, even for as much as I love Roadie to Nowhere, I'll admit its only issue is that it feels as though it's trying too hard to tell a moral. And this issue was especially prominent in episodes like The Loudest Thanksgiving. Hell, for as much as I don't like Tripped, I'll give the episode credit that at least it was focused more on just trying to be a silly road trip story instead of just trying to force a moral to the audience. Kids are not stupid. You don't need to spoon feed a moral to them so they'll understand it. You can still have fun with yourself and tell a funny story, but if you're just trying to tell a moral and that's your only reason to make an episode, then you lose the charm of the show. And it makes it impossible for me to enjoy a lot of episodes this season because it feels like I'm not supposed to have fun, I'm just supposed to learn something out of it. A story can have a good moral with characters learning it the best way they can, but if that's your only reason to tell a story, then where's the fun in it? I don't know what happened behind the scenes at Nickelodeon. Some people may assume the reason this season wasn't as good as the others was because of Chris Savino's firing or some writers leaving the show. I'm not too sure, but the point I'm trying to make is that with all of these problems, combined with the pie chart I just showed earlier, Season 3 is honestly pretty rough to get through. I'm not saying Season 3 doesn't have good episodes, of course there are. I'm saying that if this season just simply disappeared from existence, I probably wouldn't even notice. And if a lot of the issues I mentioned are still present in season 4, that could be a sign that the show is running out of ideas. Alright, I've said enough that I need to about the season as a whole. Let's get to my bottom 5. To start this list on a lighter note, I'll mention that even though I definitely hate all of these episodes, I wouldn't say all of them are as bad as most of the bad episodes in season 1 and even season 2. Even my number 1 choice for the bottom 5 is nowhere near as bad as a lot of the worst episodes in season 1. And when it comes to season 2, aside from its number 1 pick, I'd say these episodes are about on the same level of quality as the other choices I had for season 2's bottom 5. Gotta be honest, this list was actually a lot harder to do than I thought because a lot of the bad episodes are so in between each other in terms of quality. Anyway, as for the actual bottom 5, at number 5 I have Fool Me Twice, which I easily consider to be the most cruel April Fool's episode, and the stuff that Luann does isn't even considered pranking. It's a horrible episode with such an unlikable character. Number 4, Jeers for Fears. The only reason this episode made the list was because this was one of the only episodes where I was mostly annoyed throughout the entire thing. Lincoln and Clyde are just beyond annoying here. Number 3, Sitting Bull. I really hate this episode's guts and how it tries to make the audience feel like they should feel sorry for Lynn, that she's actually a good babysitter when all she needed was the right family. Lynn is incredibly frustrating and there's nothing else salvageable I can say about it. Number 2, Tripped. This may seem like an unpopular choice, but I still can't stand this episode. And the only reason it's higher than Sitting Bull is because it's 22 minutes, therefore making it much more painful to sit through. Everything about it is awful. The jokes are bad, the story's bad, the characters are idiots for no other reason other to advance the story. It's just an awful episode. And number 1 is, of course, Friendzy. There isn't really much of a surprise in putting this episode at number 1. It's the only episode in this season that legitimately really frustrated me. Sitting Bull did that in some regard, but that was mostly thanks to Lynn's character. Friendzy, on the other hand, has every character acting like an unlikable douchebag who don't even feel like the characters from the show that they're actually a part of. Outside of that one plant gag on the television, there's nothing salvageable I could ever say about Friendzy. I wasn't really too surprised that I picked Friendzy as my least favorite episode of season 3. It's the only one that managed to frustrate me in every aspect. You may have noticed that this is the first time I wanted to do the bottom 5 first, because given what I just said about season 3, I wanted to try and end the video on a positive note. So let's move on to my top 5, the episodes I felt were the strongest this season. At number 5, I have Shop Girl. I think this is one of the episodes that best showcases the kind of person that Leni can be when she's not being treated as an obstacle or just some dumb idiot. Plus, it helps that the episode was really funny. At number 4, Racing Hearts. I wasn't sure whether or not I was going to put this episode on the list, but given how it portrays an LGBT couple, I think it deserves a spot on the list. Sure, it was repetitive, but I appreciate it for what it was trying to do, and that it didn't make such a big deal out of the fact that Luna and Sam are the same gender dating each other. Number 3, Head Poet's Anxiety. Some people may be baffled that this episode isn't number 1, because a lot of people consider it the absolute best. And yeah, I do really enjoy the episode, but the ending was a little cliched, not to mention that blog joke from Leni was kind of bad. Still, I appreciate it for what else it was trying to do, and the relationship between Luann and Lucy was just adorable. At number 2, Roadie to Nowhere. If we're not considering Ella's For Lover Luna episode, then this is easily her best one by far. It showcases a lot of her flaws perfectly, and there's not really much wrong I can say about it. Outside of the fact that it tries to deliver its moral a little too rapidly, but it wasn't a problem because I felt it played perfectly within the story. And number 1 is Everybody Loves Leni. To me, there was no competition. This is easily the best episode of season 3. Everything about it is done absolutely perfectly. The characters are likable, the comedy is strong, the story is interesting, it's not trying too hard to tell a moral. It's the kind of good episode I expected out of season 2, and I appreciate it for that. And that is a shame with season 3, because when this season was first coming out, I was really excited for it. I remember how the season was originally going to be diving into more serious topics, but but I couldn't help but feel a lot of episodes this season were rewritten. That could be because of Chris Savino's firing, but in any case, season 3 felt like a step backwards. Throughout the course of me reviewing season 3, even during its time on DeviantArt, some people were wondering if I was ever going to continue talking about the Loud House after season 3. Because unfortunately, despite this season's average rating, this was the season where I actively decided to quit being a fan of the Loud House. Now with all that said, I've come to a proposition. In the recent months, I've had a thought that season 5 is likely going to be the last season of the Loud House given the lower ratings that the show's been having nowadays. So here's what's gonna happen. If the Loud House does stop at season 5, I will review season 4 and 5 as well. I was originally gonna be quitting after season 3, but only if the show continues on much longer after season 5. It's very likely that could happen, but there's also a chance it could likely stop after season 5. And maybe if I'm lucky, I'll also talk about the movie as well. I just don't feel it would be right to quit talking about a show if it's going to be stopping 2 seasons after the one I'm talking about right now. So that's how it's going to go down. If season 5 is the last one, I'll talk about that in season 4. But if it keeps going after that, then yeah, I'm not going to be talking about Loud House that much anymore. That doesn't mean I'm going to stop talking about Loud House in general, because I have plenty of other video ideas for this particular series, such as some discussion videos and even doing top 10 lists. But as of right now, this will be the last time I talk about Loud House, unless it stops at season 5. Firstly, I want to give a special thanks to one of my friends, Animation Fan 15, for providing all of the objects that you saw in this video. He even decided to do Garbage House variants of all the episodes I didn't like, which I couldn't help but feel must have been a bit hard for him, considering a lot of episodes I don't like he really loves. So Isaac, if you're watching this, I'm sorry if that's what you had to go through. Special thanks also goes to my colleagues at Podcast Pals for supervising this video and giving me plenty of ideas on what I should do. Thanks to all my fans for waiting patiently on this video coming out. And of course, thank you guys so much for watching this video. I hope the wait was worth it. But until next time, keep on playing, Yoshi players.